Hello, everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of Dueling over Dual-Use Infrastructure, a virtual workshop presented by Alaska Center for Energy and Power and the Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference. For those of you who weren't able to join us yesterday, my name is Layasi Vanessa Lee Raymond. I'm the Deputy Director for Strategic Initiatives at the Alaska Center for Energy and Power, and I will be your MC again today. Welcome for the first time, or welcome again if you were here with us yesterday. So we'll do a quick overview of what we'll get into this morning or this afternoon if you're joining us from the East Coast. As a reminder, this spring, ASEP is hosting a series of 4 virtual workshops. You'll see them on the screen now. These are held as 2 half-day Zoom sessions leading up to the Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference, which is taking place in person from June 3rd to June 5th at the Denina Center in Anchorage, Alaska. The purpose of these workshops is to take a deeper dive into topics that are relevant to energy opportunities and challenges facing Alaska today. Our last and final workshop is next week, the IEEE 1547 Interconnection Standard, Enabler of Technical Innovation and End User Benefit, which will be on Tuesday and Wednesday, May 13th and 14th. So this is the 4th year that ASEP has hosted these workshops. All of the previous workshops have been recorded and are accessible online on the Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference website. We have posted the link in the chat in case you want to revisit any of these topics. There's a lot of relevant information, and so if you're interested in learning more and finding out about what could work in Alaska, click the link in the chat. So today, the conversation about dual-use infrastructure continues, and we'll be, again, looking at multiple perspectives on what is dual-use infrastructure, what are the opportunities, and what are the challenges in Alaska. These presentations will culminate in panel discussions that bring all of the speakers together to talk more in depth and in detail about what we mean when we say dual-use infrastructure and what we need to do in order to leverage these opportunities. You'll see on the slide that we have the Association of Defense Communities and National Security, which starts at home. We'll be talking about unleashing the grid and perspectives from the lower 48. We'll again look at community priorities and perspectives with regard to dual-use infrastructure. And then we'll have a panel discussion. And I think it's great that we're wrapping up with federal and defense perspectives. At the end of the day, we need to marry these two desires and needs together, community priorities and federal and defense priorities. So before we get started, we have a few polls for you. To participate in today's polls from your computer, you can go to pollev.com/TOTTAK216. We recommend Google Chrome for this, and then we've also posted that in the chat. If you want to participate by your phone, you can text TOTTAK216 2233. You will receive a text message, and then you can join the session. And you type and send your responses, and they will pop up on the screen. So you've had a chance to do that. We'll go to the next slide, which is to show where people are joining us from. I always love to see this. It always surprises me. Who's coming to this webinar? So we have people in Anchorage. We have people from outside of Alaska. I'll give you guys a few minutes to answer the questions. Awesome. Maybe Unalaska, maybe Homer. It's harder to tell on my screen where exactly those are. Okay, a lot of Alaskans dialing in. Wonderful. Okay, you guys got the hang of this poll. So the second question is for those that attended yesterday. So if you joined us yesterday, what were your main takeaways from yesterday's presentation? So we've got 2 thoughts here, but there's lots of opportunity, and I agree. I came away from yesterday's workshop thinking, wow, we have a lot of potential work to do here. And then the second one is dual use infrastructure is more vital to national security than expected. I think we heard an overwhelming examples of how that is potential, a lot of potential for national security considerations. Okay. We will move to the next one, which is just a few housekeeping reminders. So I want to go over those before we get started. Please introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know your name and your organization. If you're having any difficulties throughout the webinar, you can text event support. So you just type in event support into the chat and someone will come help you. As a reminder, during the workshop, all attendees will be muted. And so you can submit questions into the chat and comments as well. Our moderators will collect those and curate the questions for during the panel discussions. And hello, Tom. Hello, Larissa. And then as a reminder, the recording of this workshop will be available on the ASEC website, which is alaskasustainableenergy.com. If you have to step away, or if you want to rewatch something, or if you want to share the presentation with someone you work with, you're able to do that. And hello, Paul. All right, so I think we can jump right into it. I'd like to welcome Matt Boren from the Association of Defense Communities. For 2 decades, Matt has dedicated his career to advocating for communities, service members, veterans, and military families on local, state, and federal levels. Since 2012, Matt has been with the Association of Defense Communities, also known as ADC, a national nonprofit organization representing communities and states with significant military presence, like Alaska, and currently serves as executive director. If you have any questions for Matt, remember you can use the chat and we'll bring them into our panel discussion later on. Welcome, Matt.
Welcome. Thank you. And hello from semi-sunny DC. I'm just thrilled to be here. I appreciate you having me and being able to talk to this group. And so I want to do a few things while we have our initial 15 minutes. And then, I'm looking forward to the discussion after this where we can do a little bit of a deeper dive. I think first I want to start with some background on what ADC is. ADC is an organization that has been around for 50 years, and we got our start back in the day when DoD started closing military bases. And this was really before they had to ask Congress for permission to do that. So they could literally padlock the gate, throw the community the key and say, good luck. And they did that. They did that quite a bit. And even after Congress got involved with the base realignment and closure legislation in the 80s and 90s, and then last time in 2005, DoD ended up closing some 200 plus bases in this country. And so originally that's who we were. We were these communities grappling with the loss of, in most cases, the biggest economic engine there. So it was a lot of economic redevelopment, a lot of environmental cleanup and land use, facility transfer, kind of all of those awful issues. But if you fast forward to today, our membership is almost entirely communities and states that have an active military presence. So you point to a base anywhere here in the country, and we have a member there. And it's a little different everywhere you go. Sometimes it's a chamber of commerce, sometimes it's a city, sometimes it's a county. But really, our members are whichever organization there at the local level that has come to take the lead when it comes to installation advocacy and partnership. And really still looking at it through that economic development lens. And where our issues used to be focused on redevelopment and these types of things. Today, it's still a lot of infrastructure. It's still a lot of roads, still a lot of utilities, a lot of joint land use planning and encroachment on the installation. But it's also a lot of quality of life, a lot of housing, schools, all of these issues that a base relies upon and can't succeed without community support and involvement. But the issues keep evolving. And now we're seeing kind of more mission, I would say, impactful issues come up. Things like foreign investment around military bases. things like drone incursions, threats to critical infrastructure from cyber and other kind of physical force protection challenges. And all of these things, I think, have helped DoD and communities realize that they can't get to these issues unless they work together, that all of these things transcend the fence line. And that's had to be, a real cultural shift, not only for communities, but for DoD. DoD has long, I think, prided itself and thought of itself as kind of islands unto themselves, but that's just not the case anymore. And so today I want to talk a little bit about our home initiative, and I'll share my screen here. And this initiative was really designed to help our members talk to the new administration, to the new Congress, about all of the different types of programs and challenges that really define and bring to the forefront the concept that national security starts at home. And so I want to talk a little bit about kind of what defense communities do and who they are, and some of the challenges and evolution that we've seen over the past 15 to 20 years. And I think one of the biggest success stories is that continued and advanced integration between the communities and the bases. And I can tell you this was not always the case. Even 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, when I got started, there was a lot of disconnect there, and there wasn't this tight connection like that I've seen growing over the country these days. And a lot of that has to do with that idea that of economic development. And from the community perspective, that the base is not just a nice to have and can be taken for granted, but they have to be actively engaged. Somebody has to be doing the full-time advocacy partnership work. And at first it was just, how do I keep my base from closing? But now it's much more forward-looking, right? It's how do I attract the next mission? How do I attract new defense industry investment? And those things all require an active, full-time engagement on the part of the community and state as well. And this idea that they're speaking with one voice. And I can tell you, engaging with Alaska and your communities there over the past decade, I've seen some real growth in how you all partner with your military footprint. And it's been I think exciting to see. And there are a few programs within DoD that ADC has been responsible for getting off the ground that I really want to talk about. And I think it's important to keep these programs top of mind, especially when you're talking with new members of DoD, your new installation leaders, your members of Congress and congressional staff. Because often when we think about partnerships, that doesn't necessarily translate to folks who don't have a background in this, and they're thinking about lethality, right? What do partnerships and these things have to do with lethality? And I think the idea that national security starts at home is something that requires kind of an education. So essential programs and offices that bases and communities rely upon. One is probably the most important, the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation, or OLDCC. OLDCC was stood up just like ADC was nearly 50 plus years ago. And its original mission, was to help communities that had lost their military installation. But like ADC, it has evolved over the years, and now it is probably the entity within DoD most important to communities. And it provides the grants, the technical assistance, the different types of programs that communities can rely on when they're looking for different types of tools and authorities to partner with their base. Okay, so this is the one that I've been talking to for a while. And I'll put this back up at the end so you can visit this website or use the QR code at the end. Here's where I was talking about kind of the defense communities, who we are and what we do. And here's where I was talking about the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation and the different types of programs that it administers and that communities have taken advantage of for the past 50 plus years. One of the most exciting, and I think one of the one I'm most proud of, is the Defense Community Infrastructure Program. And you might be familiar with this and heard it mentioned over the last day or so during this event, But I'll kind of start at the beginning of the genesis of this program, how it's evolved, and where it is at today. So the concept behind the Defense Community Infrastructure Program was that there is off-base infrastructure that is absolutely critical to the mission of the base, but there wasn't a mechanism by which DoD and communities could work together to improve that infrastructure. And so when I first started, back in 2012, 2013, a lot of what I was hearing from communities is that the base was saying things like, fix your roads. We need redundant water systems. We need different utility and telecommunication systems and infrastructure off the base. And a community was sort of left wondering, is this a nice to have, or does the base really truly need this? If I'm a small community and I take out a $300 million bond to pay for some of these things, is it really worth it? Again, is this just a nice to have? And shouldn't the base have a little bit of skin in the game when it comes to supporting this? And so ADC, working with communities, was able to draft legislation that in 2020 went through Congress and the National Defense Authorization Act that stood up the Defense Community Infrastructure Program within OLDCC. Currently, the program gets about $100 million a year. And this program is designed to provide state and local governments with matching grants, 70% federal or 70% DoD, 30% community or state match for infrastructure located off base that somehow supports the mission or families of the base. And we wrote this legislation very broad. So it can literally be roads, utilities, telecommunications, it can be parks, it can be schools, it can be all of these different things that support the mission of the base and that have become more and more critical to its success. I encourage you to visit oldcc.gov and see the some 65 plus projects that have been selected since 2020. It's pretty impressive, the kind of the breadth of projects that have been selected. And I can tell you the window for this year's application just opened. And you can find all of that at oldcc.gov and learn about how to apply for this program. It's very competitive. And I can tell you the first thing that they look at are military value and installation resilience issues. So I hope you'll check that out. The second program I want to talk about is the Installation Resilience Program. This, again, managed by OldCC, this program is a grant provided to state or local governments that helps it partner with the base to host tabletop exercises where they can identify kind of critical weaknesses or different types of challenges or even opportunities about how they can partner together to address some of those key challenges. There are several opportunities for these grants each year, and I think I'm going to be joined here by my colleague Will, whose organization helps manage and helps communities implement some of these grant and tabletop programs. Again, you can learn more about that at oldcc.gov. And then finally, one thing I want to talk about, and I think this program, this authority, has been more important in connecting the base and the community and institutionalizing partnerships than any other authority. Created in 2013 through NDAA legislation drafted and supported by ADC, this Intergovernmental Support Agreement, or IGSA, as you'll hear them called. This allows a base to enter into sole source contracts with state and local governments and public utilities for a full range of services. Anything that a base in a city rely on, thinking about public works. So it can be, trash pickup and road maintenance, facility maintenance, transportation and bus, you kind of name it. It's even now being used for things like childcare and procurement, bulk purchasing. And now today, there are nearly over 300 IGSAs at installations across the country. And the types of programs are growing. And now it's not just communities, but states and even regions entering into these partnerships. allowing them to get more bang for their buck. And these don't have to be competed, so the FAR doesn't apply. Again, these can be sole source contracts. And it has today saved DoD over $100 million annually. And that number continues to grow. And I think when you look at all of these different authorities and programs in kind of a holistic package, you're talking and speaking the language that this administration seems intent on pushing. One, they're looking at efficiency and finding dollars and cutting back waste. I challenge you to find another program or a set of programs within DoD that actually makes DoD money and brings in resources like the ones I've just talked about. And then two, when they're looking at national security and they're talking about things like a potential engagement or conflict with China or North Korea or these other adversaries, the first thing that's going to happen will be here at home. This idea that the homeland is no longer safe, something that you've heard this administration and this Congress talk about. The first thing that would happen here would the lights would go out, right? The water might start working. You might see drones slamming into buildings. Drone swarms trying to attack a military installation. And all of those issues, all of those challenges are going to require a one community response. If the base and the community aren't connected at the hip and planning for something like that, then they're doing themselves a disservice. And we're not embracing this idea that national security must start where our missions start, and that's here at home. So I'll stop there. I know that was a lot. And hopefully we can pick up some conversation when we get to the panel.
Oh, thank you, Matt. That was really, it was a lot to take in, but it's really exciting things to think about. And I appreciate how you took us from the history into the present and future. That was wonderful also to remind us how far we've come. So I'm going to now invite Will Rogers to present on behalf of Converge Strategies. If you were with us yesterday, you heard a little bit from Converge already. Will is a principal at Converge Strategies. That is a consulting firm that specializes in energy, resilience, and national security. Will calls on more than 15 years of experience in government and civil society to drive national defense strategies, policies, and initiatives, having served in senior roles at the Department of Defense and in the U.S. Senate. He specializes in connecting and aligning national security innovators across the federal government, state and local government, academia, and industry. So welcome, Will.
Well, thank you, Vanessa, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or maybe good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. First, I want to thank the University of Alaska Fairbanks and the Alaska Center for Energy and Power for the invitation to join this important conversation. So as you heard from Vanessa, my name is Will Rogers. I'm a principal with Converge Strategies. We're a consulting firm working at the intersection of energy resilience and national security. And as Matt Morin just said, we've been well nested with defense communities to support their DoD installation readiness reviews. And you heard from our CEO, Mike Wu, yesterday about that work, including our support to JBEAR. Until January, I served as a senior advisor for the Army, helping the department improve the resilience of its critical infrastructure against all hazards, particularly the extreme weather that we know is becoming more frequent and severe. And before I joined the Army, I spent about a decade on Capitol Hill as a national security staffer in the Senate. I'm excited for the chance to talk about a new report we published earlier this year with our partners at the Association of Defense Communities called Unleashing the Grid, Energy Dominance for National Defense. And that report builds on a body of work that Converge Strategies has been leading for several years now, which has really sought to shed light on the national defense importance of a resilient and reliable transmission grid. Now, if you walk away with only one thing today, I hope it's this. The success of the military's warfighting mission depends on the commercial power grid. Now, I think a lot of people think of DoD energy security as access to the fuel it might need for the mission over there, or wherever over there might be. But that's only one part of the story. In reality, the energy that powers domestic military installations is critical to the fight because DoD has become a globally networked force over the last several decades. Overseas operations increasingly depend on support from installations here at home. Everything from offensive and defensive cyber squadrons disrupting bad actors, command and control cells coordinating the movements of special forces in the field, to surveillance drones providing critical overwatch. In many places, those operations depend on power from the commercial grid. Even when there is on-base backup power for those critical missions, The people who run them, they live outside the fence line in the community. And we need those troops and the defense civilians living in the community to be the best versions of themselves when they come to the base to do those critical operations. And that can be hard because if there's a power outage, they may be worried about their ability or the ability of their families to access critical services that have lost power, things like banks, grocery stores, and schools. And so even if the installation can ride out a power outage with backup power, their people can't. And so knowing this, what do? Well, that's what our report, Unleashing the Grid, is all about. It challenges defense stakeholders, folks at installations, people in the community who have ties to the installation, to ask some fundamental questions that are meant to help them get better visibility into how vulnerable the power grid is in their region. Questions like, how much is electricity demand increasing in the community and how quickly? How is extreme weather challenging reliability? And how is electricity supply in the region evolving? These questions give defense stakeholders insights into the resilience and reliability of the grid today. But that work is really incomplete unless they also put this into the context of their own energy requirements. For example, are new missions driving an increase in their electricity load? And if so, by how much and by when? That's valuable information to help them understand their future risk to power shortages, but it's also vital information to inform grid planning and should be shared with utility and grid operators so that they can adequately account for DoD's needs. And that brings me to the final point I want to make in this part of the conversation. DoD's needs don't exist in a vacuum. Nationally, we're seeing outsized demand on the grid driven by energy-intensive commercial industries like AI data centers and semiconductor chip manufacturers. Nationally, that demand for electricity to serve these new customers is forecasted to surge 35 to 50% by 2040. And in Alaska, a very similar dynamic could play out as we've seen the Trump administration elevate the state's strategic importance and is committed to unlocking its vast natural resource wealth. That's likely to require a build out of energy intensive operations that could put new demand on local power grids, including in areas where the military is located. What we don't want to see, and what we want to avoid, is a zero sum situation where DoD is competing for power from these new operations and is instead working with the state, local, and tribal governments to align its energy investments in a way that meets its needs and supports the long term economic development for communities across Alaska. And that's eminently doable, but it requires some work. To accomplish that, DoD must communicate its needs with grid planners and so that its defense loads are built into future power generation and transmission investments. DoD can also be an active participant by working to site energy generation and transmission lines on its installations to help expand the delivery of cost-effective, reliable, and resilient energy across Alaska. Now, if you're interested in learning more, and I hope you are, you can read more about our report and access some of our living resources, including a guide for navigating regulatory processes at unleashthegrid.org. And I want to, since Matt Moran is here on the call, or with us today, I really want to commend him and his team at the Association of Defense Communities for their leadership to make it clear that national security starts at home. We really wouldn't be able to do the work that we do, and we wouldn't be able to connect with defense communities without their support and helping us to elevate the national defense importance of a reliable and transmission grid to not only the Department of Defense, but the defense communities that help them serve and do their mission. So I want to thank again the University of Alaska Fairbanks and Alaska Center for Energy and Power for hosting this discussion, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation and your questions. So thanks.
Well, yeah, I think it's going to be a great conversation during the panel as well. So we'll move into the Q&A portion of Matt and Will's presentations. I will be the moderator for this session, so please put your questions in the chat and let's check it right now to see how we're doing. We've got a few questions in already. And so the first question I have is, it's really about, if you had a magic wand, what would you like to immediately change based on everything that you shared with us today?
I would have more money. About these programs. No, I would think the one thing, and that we'll probably be advocating over the course of the year, especially as we see DoD budget grow, is more money for the Defense Community Infrastructure Program. I think this is an incredibly underutilized program by the department, and it takes some education, right? and I think, Will and the report and his team put together, gets to the heart of that. Our missions, their ability to project power relies on public, state, local, private infrastructure. And DoD only has one mechanism, really, by which to partner with communities to support that. And $100 million doesn't go a long way, even if there is a match. And right now they can select 18 to 20 projects a year, but they get 200 different applications. And the base commander, by the way, has to sign a letter of endorsement for each application. So the services, as they rack and stack these projects every year, they kind of throw up their hands and say, man, we had to say no to so many good ones. With just a little bit of investment, though, this program has paid incredible dividends. And so I would say it's easy to say that you just want more money, but I think this is one place where that really would make sense.
Yeah, Vanessa, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd wish for two things. And because I have a magic wand, I could get those two things. So I would say, in the spirit of Matt's, more money, what I would say is I would try to reduce the costs of energy generation and transmission projects, because that's a long pole in the tent. Affordability is on the top of mind for everyone. And I think it's very easy to delay action because of the cost of doing business. But we know what the cost of inaction is. Cost of inaction in terms of the National Defense Mission and taking risks there, the cost of inaction for those living in the defense community, particularly the junior enlisted, who are at risk of their food spoiling when the power goes out, and they're several $100s for the groceries spoiling and not being able to get that back. And I think it's very easy to say, well, the cost of these projects is too high. We can't afford to have $5 more in our electricity bills, but what costs are we willing to pay? And I think knowing the cost of inaction and being able to reduce the costs of all these projects maybe reduces the barrier to actually doing these projects in the first place. The other thing I would say is building awareness, particularly among senior mission commanders and military leaders, who I think for the longest time who have assumed that energy is just going to be there when they need it. We learned this the hard way from the operational side of the house with fuel in combat theater in Iraq and Afghanistan, where fuel was just assumed to be where they needed to be able to support missions. And I think we've found the same thing here at home, where you've got senior mission commanders, the 2 and 3 stars, who just assume the lights will be on when they needed to, because that's always how it has been. And we're seeing a changing dynamic now where DoD, the longest time, has been the largest load customer in a community. Maybe they were the largest load customer. That's no longer the case when they're competing with the Googles, Microsoft, and Amazons of the world, who are putting data centers that are dwarfing the department's energy, by an order of magnitude. And what that means is that energy is zero sum. You can't have utilities may be in a situation where they're going to have to choose to service the load from the data center operators or the department. And you've got an administration, 2 administrations now have said that AI and semiconductors are essential to national security. So do you serve the data centers and semiconductor chip manufacturers that are supporting national security, or do you serve the defense installation that's also part of national security, and who makes that call? But I think building awareness among the senior mission commanders and making them to be advocates, working with utilities and grid planners so that we can avoid that false choice, is really important.
Lots of good stuff there. And that's an interesting dichotomy of, who makes that call, right? I think you both talked about the economics of inaction. I was thinking about something that Matt had said earlier, which is that if the base and the community have to be attached at the hip, what are some of the challenges that you see to actually doing that? Some communities don't feel a strong affinity for the base, or they don't think of people enlisted on the base as part of the community. What ways have you seen this be addressed?
Well, just like it's an education process here, it's always an education process at the local level too. And I think often the strongest argument you can talk about is dollars, and what the base actually means in terms of true economic impact, and how it impacts restaurants, how it impacts local, gas stations, schools, all of these, different types of things that these wages and jobs bring in. And so that's why I think we've seen a lot of defense community organizations come out of that, usually the Chamber of Commerce or the economic development world, right, where they're making these arguments. And I think, for the base, it's often new for them too. A new base commander, they weren't trained, they didn't go to school for the last, 20 years to be a base commander. Often they're coming from a fighter. They just, their last role was a fighter jet or a tank commander or, what have you. And then they had a 1 month crash course in how to lead a city connected to another city. And so it's a lot of, they don't know what they don't know. And so, this education has to almost trickle down, right? We can say it here, we can push it up and out, but ultimately the communities that do the best, that are the most, I would say, successful, not only in attracting dollars economically, but also providing that sense that they are one community, are those that are doing the engagement full time, that they have an entity, a person on the ground there whose full job is educating not only the base, but the community leaders on how interdependent they are upon one another.
Mhm. Yeah, and Will, if you'll add a little bit about the interdependence of the electrical systems as well into what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Vanessa. I think, the Department of Defense has evolved from this idea of being able to island itself off of the community with backup, generation, on-site energy storage and microgrids. Yeah, that was sort of a nice place to be for the longest time. 10 years ago was a good idea, but they've moved away from that idea because they've recognized that being able to island yourself for a period of time sounds good, but it becomes a single point of failure if you do that. The idea of being more resilient is actually tying into the community and building in community resilience so that you're not relying on a single point. The backup generation, the energy storage, it might work for some time, but it becomes a single point of failure either by some technological failure or whatever. And so I think that same, Matt's point about that sort of interconnectedness between the economic ties is also true from a technological perspective. And it's not only true for infrastructure; it's wastewater and water systems as well. And so those critical infrastructure dependencies, I think, tie the installation and the defense community at the hip, and making sure that you've got installation commanders who come in every 2 years, 3 years, depending on where you're at. They need to understand that. They need to understand that relationship and work with the city managers and the public works folks outside of the installation that understand those vulnerabilities and to work to mitigate where those vulnerabilities out in the community are going to impact the installation's ability to conduct its critical operations. Not just its electricity, but again, as I said, it's water and wastewater and other systems.
Yeah, that's a great point that the interconnections, both from a human and a technological perspective, really do increase resilience, give us more options when we need options. We have a question from Larissa, who will present later today, which they ask, we have a good marine vessel tracking system. Is there a drone tracking system in the works?
Not that I'm aware of, not a national drone tracking system, although it might be part of the Golden Dome, proposal at some point. I was at the Pentagon earlier this week, and it's something they're very concerned about. Drone incursions are becoming more and more common over the airspace, and it's not just kind of onesies and twosies. They're starting to see swarms. I think they will, correct me if I'm wrong, but they held a hearing in the House about this. It was either last week or earlier this week, about the real concern that this is going to cause. And a lot of it has to do with airspace, right? Who owns the airspace over a base versus the city versus the county? And so you're starting to see places have to get creative. And I think I was out in North Carolina last week for the North Carolina Defense Forum. And one of the most kind of illuminating things I heard was from a Marine Corps air station, Cherry Point. They have partnered with the city outside the base on this issue and are doing kind of joint emergency response, law enforcement tracking, where not only can they identify, but they can give permission to shoot down these drones, and they can share information and technology about how to find the operator and where they might be in the community. I think that's a great first step, because just like we realized that foreign investment around military bases was a real thing not too long ago, a few years ago, and how widespread that is, I think this is the next thing. I think some of these stuff that we're seeing right now is the canary in the coal mine, and we're going to have to figure it out.
Yeah, and Vanessa, if I could, I just want to footstall a point that Matt just made, because I encountered this when I was working in the Senate, this issue of jurisdiction and what can the Department of Defense do, knowing that this threat exists, above them or right outside the fence line, and can they actually interdict, drones that might be a threat to their operating airspace. If not, are there other federal agencies like the FBI or others, or do they need to rely on local partners? And a lot of times, as Matt's saying, having those joint use or joint aid agreements in place to be able to work with partners outside of the defense line, so that before there's an issue, you've already sort of stress test who's going to act and respond when there is an issue. I think is really really prudent, and it just reinforces the point that Matt's been making, that the installation is tied to the hip with the community, not just for all the infrastructure and the economic benefits, but also for when there are crises, in having those mutual aid agreements really be specific about who has a responsibility over what and where.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about jurisdiction. In Alaska, we have a lot more complications about jurisdiction. And so it's the top of mind, I think, for many of the Alaskans on the call. So we have a call directly to Matt. Will you contact me about the old CC grant program? It sounds fascinating, and we've been really at Alaska Center for Energy and Power have been very excited about some of the old CC grants that come in around defense and communities and military families. So you have contact information there. People are anxious to get access to your slides, and I think those will be provided, and the recording will be provided. And then we have a question coming in from Sherry. So this may be too technical, but how would valid redundancy requirements and needs be addressed in grant applications, as many government grants penalize or forbid redundancy? I think you both have talked about single points of failure and redundancy, so this is a great question. This has been a challenging, for instance, in funding a request for broadband in Alaska.
Will, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a good answer to this, Sherry, except to say that I would sort of try to not, I would steer away from framing it as a or providing redundancy, and providing it more in terms of through the resilience lens. Redundancy, I think to your point, carries the connotation of spending good money after that may not be necessary if there's already some measure in place to provide a safety net. But I think what you're getting at seems to be that there isn't a safety net or some resilience measure in place, and so emphasizing what happens when the current, if it's broadband infrastructure, for example, emphasizing the impacts to the military, to lethality, the military mission. And Matt was talking about the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation. The Patrick O'Brien, who leads that office, he's really emphasized the need to steer into language that is going to be resonant with this, with the administration and their emphasis on lethality and warfighting. And I think having the language that resonates where it's not necessarily redundant, providing redundancy for these critical operations, but resilience to help sharpen lethality and warfighting in that context, I think is going to be really important for any grants that you're going to put forward.
To piggyback on that, I think you'll find in the DCIP, the Defense Community Infrastructure Program grant process, they don't penalize redundancy. And in fact, a lot of times when they're looking at utilities, what they're looking for is that, how do I expand beyond a single point of failure, right? How do we have backup systems that help both the community and the base? And I will say one thing, what I've seen at the state level now is, more and more states are standing up offices directly responsible for military advocacy and partnership work. So when I first started, over a decade ago, there were maybe 5 states that had such an office, and now there are nearly almost 30. And not only does it help when they're speaking with one voice to DOD or to congressional lawmakers, but they're also creating legislation. They're also able to pass new laws and programs. Texas, for example, has their own version of DCIP, where they give $40 million every year to communities for off-base infrastructure that supports the base. And they're not alone. California, Maryland, Virginia, Florida, all of them are looking at these types of things. Alaska is, and I don't want to, call you out here, but I think you've been a little behind the game in terms of having that state level engagement. I know it's, politics and things like that can always get in the way, but I think having that one voice at the state level has become critical.
Well, you sort of started asking my last question for both of you is, we've talked a lot about the relationship between defense and communities. We've talked about the economics. We've talked about single points of failure. in the Alaskan context, specifically for critical infrastructure, many of the communities that we have are not close to a military base. And they are running a single point of failure wastewater and electrical system. And in that situation, they're often the front line of defense. They're seeing things first, they're detecting them first. Things will happen in and around their community that they need to then host, a response community. So I'm curious if you have any final thoughts that are specific to Alaskan communities about how they can leverage the opportunities you're seeing, participate in bigger initiatives to increase resiliency.
Absolutely. I think you've got a great start in the Alaska Defense Forum that you host each year, that the city of Fairbanks, North Star Borough kind of partnered with ADC on, 4 or 5 years ago. And it's been amazing to see that continue to grow, without necessarily direct ADC support. So you have an amazing team, Brittany Smart and others that have worked on that. I mean, that's a model for other places in the country. And I think that's been something to brag about from the statewide perspective. What I will say is a new opportunity that passed in Congress that improved that intergovernmental support agreement authority I talked about. Tribal governments are now eligible to participate in that. And they don't have to be right next door to the base. I mean, this can be procurement and bulk purchasing. It can be a whole manner of services. It's very broad and flexible authority, and all of the services are very eager to use it. And not only does it save DoD money, it brings in a lot of money to these public, local, and state governments. So something to explore.
Yeah, and I'll just echo Matt's point there about that intergovernmental support authority and really leaning into the expansive provision that Congress enabled for tribal governments, because I think that is a huge opportunity. But I also just want to give kudos to Matt and his organization, because I think they've done a really great job of trying to expand the aperture of what constitutes a defense community. For the longest time, people thought it had to be right outside the fence line, your neighborhood, your town or county that's just abutting the military installation. But I think we've become more accustomed now to the idea that the defense community can be much broader than that. It can be the community that may be 100 miles away from the installation, but is part of the defense industrial base that's producing whatever widget the warfighter 100 miles away may need in order to do the warfighting. And it may be, Vanessa, to your point, those frontline communities in Alaska in the frontier who are providing critical eyes and ears to what might be happening in the high north. That this administration and others have really emphasized is going to be part of the dynamic strategic environment with as the region changes and we have more strategic competitors playing in our backyard. So I think the more we can lean into the idea that the defense community is more expansive than just people right outside the fence line, as important as those people are, we can embrace the tent's much bigger, and we need to be comfortable having the department also recognize that and working with those partners who may be a little bit farther away from the military installation, but are still integral to our national defense.
I feel so invigorated hearing from you guys, hearing your perspective. Seems like there's a lot of potential that we could leverage. And Paul Thompson said in the chat, this has been very interesting and I would love to stay in contact about this. I feel very similarly. So glad to have met you both today. And thank you for helping us in Alaska start our morning with these thoughts top of mind.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Will. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. So we will now move into a short break. You can stretch your legs, you can grab some coffee, and we will see you back here at 9:30 Alaska time. See you soon. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. If you're just logging in, we are getting back into our discussion on dual use infrastructure. And what we've been focusing on so far this morning is how to develop relationships between defense and civilian entities, and how this can ultimately strengthen communities economically and from a national perspective, national security perspective. We're going to continue in that vein in our next set of presentations on community priorities and perspectives. We will start off with Katie Conway of the Denali Commission. Similar to yesterday and today's earlier presentations, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and we will bring them into a panel discussion later on. Katie manages the Denali Commission's energy and bulk fuel program, which includes projects and initiatives that repair, replace, and maintain community power systems and bulk fuel tank farms. Katie has nearly 2 decades of experience working on Alaska's energy and infrastructure sectors in program and project management, policy and communications, and public outreach roles. Welcome, Katie.
All right. Good morning. Today, I will be giving an overview of the Denali Commission and the Commission's vital role in addressing critical infrastructure needs in rural Alaska. But first, to provide some context for that overview, I will start with some information about the unique challenges of life in Alaska's villages, and then go into a little of our history and our tools, the impact of our energy and bulk fuel program, and then at the end, talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that we have going right now with a lot of questions. I think I have more questions than answers. But first, Brittany Smart reminded me that for this audience, for this conversation, I need to start with the bottom line up front. So why are we even talking about this? Can rural community energy and bulk fuel infrastructure really serve a dual use purpose? Increased Arctic operations demand infrastructure that serves both defense and civilian needs, and I understand that it's why we're all here today having this conversation. For Alaska's remote communities, which are characterized by extreme conditions, very small populations, vast distances, and limited resources, I think that's a different sort of conversation than it is for larger, more connected urban places. Standalone systems in rural Alaska are costly and difficult to make sustainable, and there's an overwhelmingly large and growing backlog of deferred maintenance that we're not able to address with current funding levels. On paper, at least, the dual investment of dual use could be a win-win. Shared infrastructure builds joint ownership, accountability, and resilience across missions and communities. Dual use is ultimately an efficiency initiative, and in the words of the university's Brittany Smart, again, it's also about survival, sovereignty, and security in the Arctic. But is it truly possible? And if yes, how can we make it work in these remote places? How can we ensure community needs are met and systems are in place for infrastructure to be sustainably managed over time? Does cultivating a dual use purpose offer a path to overcoming the deferred maintenance backlog and improving community energy security while also supporting evolving defense needs in the Arctic? These are some of the questions the Denali Commission is starting to ask. To understand the work of the Commission and some of the considerations in developing dual-use infrastructure, it's important to appreciate the uniqueness of rural villages. And I understand that most of the participants today are located within Alaska, and so you probably already know all of this. These first few slides then will be for future viewers of the recorded presentation who might tune in from farther away. Alaska, as everyone knows, is huge. It covers almost 600,000 square miles of land area, and we have a really small population. Most of the approximately 200 villages making up rural Alaska have populations of fewer than 500 people, and these communities are spread out over vast distances with nothing but raw wilderness or water in between. The population density in Alaska as a whole is 1.3 people per square mile, which is a pretty big contrast to the national average of 98 people per square mile. And in rural Alaska, if you discount all of the road-connected communities, it's 0.2 people per square mile. Accessibility in these far-flung places is limited to boat or small plane, and there are no road or electric transmission connections to larger population centers. And that remoteness creates logistical challenges that affect every aspect of daily life. The isolation and small size of communities come with really high costs. Everything from groceries to fuel is significantly more expensive than in Anchorage, Fairbanks, Juneau, or the lower 48. These communities rely on critical infrastructure like power generation and distribution systems, their water treatment plant and above-ground piping, and bulk fuel storage tanks for their survival. The word critical takes on a new depth of meaning in these places where solutions, when equipment fails or fuel unexpectedly runs out, are days and many layers of complicated logistics away. Fuels for generating power in these remote communities, for heating buildings and for transportation have to be delivered by barge during the short ice-free season, or maybe flown in during emergencies or in places where barge access is no longer possible, which increases cost significantly. For perspective, you can see here the cost of heating fuel and gasoline in rural communities can be many times higher what it is in the lower 48. Other challenges to life in Alaska's villages that complicate and add expense to infrastructure development and longevity include economic hardship, the harsh climate, and a high level of environmental risk from permafrost degradation, erosion, and flooding. And these realities underscore the importance of focused efforts to improve rural infrastructure, which is where the Denali Commission comes in. Before I launch into some history of the Denali Commission and a little bit about our energy and bulk fuel program, I first want to take you on a little tour of a village, and I chose Quinnahock for no other reason than I found this really awesome flyover video that the school put together, and I'm not going to show that because we couldn't figure out how to make it work. But there's a link here, and feel free to look at that later. It might be useful for folks who listen to this or watch this recording. Quinnahock is a larger than average village of primarily Yupik people, located about 70 miles as the crow flies southwest of Bethel. It's on the east shore of the Kuskokwim Bay, less than a mile from the Bering Sea coast, and the population is around 262. This is one of the oldest continually inhabited communities in Alaska. There's a world-renowned archaeological site there that has helped date the community's presence back to about 1000 AD. The people who live here rely on a traditional subsistence lifestyle, hunting, fishing, and harvesting for much of their dietary needs. This is an AVEC community, that's Alaska Village Electric Cooperative, the state's largest rural electric co-op. The residential cost of power before accounting for PCE, power cost equalization, is 60 cents per kilowatt hour, and commercial customers pay between 30 cents and 49 cents a kilowatt hour. Fuel and other goods are barged in twice a year, and a gravel airstrip allows passengers, mail, and cargo service in small planes year-round as long as the weather is good. In the winter, there are trails to neighboring communities Eek and Good News Bay, both 39 miles away, and the local school has a whopping 200 students. That's really big for a rural community. Rural Alaska's energy systems, like a lot of people have already talked about in this workshop, are primarily diesel-powered community microgrids that sometimes includes the integration of wind or maybe solar. Bulk fuel tank farms are considered a component of the energy system because of the vital role they play in storing the fuel needed to make power, as well as the fuels for heating buildings and transportation. I'll repeat what Matt implied in his talk yesterday. Diesel is still king in Village, Alaska, even in places where there are robust renewable generation sources available. Quinnahock is primarily powered by diesel, but it does have wind. The retail cost of gas as of this winter is $8.56 a gallon. The retail cost of heating fuel is $7.98 a gallon. There are 6 tank farm facilities in the community, the largest being owned by AVEC with about 180,000 gallons of capacity, and others owned by the school, the water treatment plant, the city and tribe, and the Village Corporation's retail dispensing facility. There's also a very small 1,500-gallon Army National Guard Readiness Center tank. Most residents are served by piped water and sewer, and if you watch the video later, you can keep an eye out for the above-ground pipes, which is a pretty unique thing for rural Alaska. So I realize this is a lot of information about just one community, but I'm hoping to impress upon you with this example how different rural Alaska communities are from urban Alaska and other parts of the country. It's easy to take electricity and clean water for granted where many of us live, but in places like Quinnahock, these services are acutely appreciated because of the vulnerability and challenges inherent in the infrastructure that provides them. Whether it's the high cost of fuel, the harsh climate, or the remoteness of these villages, keeping the lights on and water running requires immense effort and investment. And that's where the Denali Commission steps in. Addressing these challenges has been at the heart of the Denali Commission's mission. Acknowledging the need for increased interagency cooperation and a focus on Alaska's remote communities, Congress introduced the Denali Commission in 1998. We were operating with a full staff and making grant awards a year later. The Commission is an independent federal agency designed to provide critical utilities, infrastructure, and economic support throughout Alaska. We are what some like to call an original model of government efficiency, and our flexibility is one of our greatest strengths. Over the last 25 years, we've partnered with other federal agencies as well as state, tribal, and local entities to deploy more than $2 billion in delivering critical investments that improve the quality of life and support economic opportunity in Alaska's remote communities. We have a broad portfolio of programs, including energy and bulk fuel. Today, we have 15 staff and we manage about $250 million in active grant awards. Our unique set of tools allow us the ability to quickly adapt to changing circumstances and efficiently, swiftly meet evolving community needs. We have the ability to accept funding transfers from any source. Our funding is considered non-federal as long as we're not the primary funder, and our funding is timeless, never expires. Our work is mission-driven and guided by the specific challenges of Alaska's remote communities, and this includes a very strong and sustained focus on energy and bulk fuel systems. One of the Commission's flagship efforts has been the Energy and Bulk Fuel Program, a cornerstone of our work for the last 25 years, and through which more than $500 million has been invested to build and maintain the rural power systems and bulk fuel tank farms on which everything else in a rural village relies. This is the infrastructure that generates and distributes electricity and stores the liquid fuels used for generating power, heating buildings, and for transportation. And it's the foundation for life and livelihoods in rural communities. Without safe, reliable, and adequate availability of power and fuel storage, village life is compromised. Our energy and bulk fuel program emphasizes a collaborative approach to overcoming challenges and improving infrastructure sustainability, working closely with federal, state, tribal, university, nonprofit, and other partners. Our funding decisions for rural power system upgrades, bulk fuel upgrades, maintenance and improvement projects, emergency repairs, facility energy efficiency improvements, workforce training and education, remote and on-site assistance, and other capacity building initiatives are guided primarily by a needs-based priority lists and the Commission's ability to adapt very nimbly to changing circumstances within that broader funding environment. While the investments made over the last 25 years have made a significant impact and with improvements, the current state of tank farms and rural power systems continues to be a serious concern because of the rate of deterioration from age, suboptimal O&M practices, and environmental threat is faster than the collective ability of funders, state and federal, to pay for the necessary repairs, rebuilds, or maybe relocations. The estimated cost of power system deficiencies is somewhere north of $400 million. And for bulk fuel tank farms, it's more than $1 billion. These numbers highlight the scale of the challenge in ensuring safe, reliable, and adequately sized power systems and tank farms in rural villages, and the need for innovative solutions to build better infrastructure sustainability. And with that in mind, the Denali Commission is investigating some new ideas and opportunities for how we can better address those challenges, including the concept of dual-use infrastructure. And it comes with a lot of questions. One investigation is how Alaska might reconfigure the way bulk fuel tank farms are owned, operated, or managed. Recognizing the scale and urgency of the challenge around bulk fuel deficiencies, we partnered with Alaska Energy Authority to launch a joint initiative called the Bulk Fuel Aggregation Study, which seeks to identify and provide a path forward toward implementing a more financially sustainable model for ensuring reliable and safe fuel storage in rural communities. Key objectives of the study include improving the longevity and condition of tank farms, reducing preventable spills, achieving operational and managerial efficiencies that generate savings, reinvesting that savings into ongoing infrastructure improvements, and reducing dependency on federal and state funding while enhancing local and regional self-reliance. The study is looking at past efforts. It is involving a lot of stakeholder engagement, and the next step will be analyzing the financial benefits of potential new paradigms, from regional fuel hubs to shared services or cooperative ownership models. The primary goal here is long-term sustainability of existing or maybe even new facilities. And the next investigation underway more relevant for this conversation. With acknowledgement of the severity of the issue with overwhelming deficiencies versus inadequate funding, the Denali Commission asked AEA to conduct some research, doing a little bit of a deep data dive into West Coast bulk fuel facilities capacity and deficiencies. This was also in preparation for the work of a new dual-use working group that is championed by the Commission's federal co-chair, Julie Kitka, and it just kicked off recently, so I don't have a whole lot more to say about that. This analysis focused on communities along Alaska's west coast, where fuel storage needs might overlap with strategic considerations for national defense. We asked, how many facilities are there? What's the current condition? And what's the estimated scope and cost of critical upgrades just to meet current community needs? And what we learned is that there are 134 facilities along Western Alaska that would require an estimated $225 million just to meet existing needs. To become useful for a defense purpose as well, additional capacity would likely need to be integrated into those projects at additional cost. AEA's story map opens the door to important conversations about collaboration and co-investment. The challenges around rural tank farms are significant, and I'm not leaving out rural power systems on purpose. There just wasn't enough time to do a dive into that, and tank farm deficiencies are the more acute problem. But you can kind of extrapolate that the same things I've mentioned here about tank farms, we can imagine there are similar issues and complications with rural power systems as well. Many communities are already struggling to have basic fuel storage needs met because of degraded or insufficiently sized facilities and a lack of funding to make improvements where they're needed. This makes expansion or reconfiguration of facilities an even more complex consideration. Let's say hypothetically, the Department of Defense contributed funding to expand the capacity of a community's co-located tank farm. The expanded capacity could enhance resilience for both the community and defense operations in the region, but how do we ensure the now larger tank farm is maintained optimally over time? Who owns that responsibility? Who assumes liability for risk? What are the values to the community of having additional fuel on site? Could residents access that fuel in emergencies if their own supplies run low? Who pays for it? And how does care of the facility factor in? How do we make sure we're being deliberative in meeting needs on both sides rather than the benefits and responsibilities of partnership being an afterthought? They're complex questions, and I think all of them require careful thought and collaboration, which is why the Denali Commission is eager to engage in conversations like this one. I'd like to wrap up by reiterating a central theme of Nils's presentation yesterday, which is that it's essential to ensure communities are involved from the get-go in all phases of planning and implementation. Dual-use infrastructure potential is about scale and feasibility and making sure there's a plan to meet community needs first. As we transition through the rest of the panel and kind of into the conversation, I'd like to encourage us all to think about a few questions. How can we sustainably fund infrastructure development and maintenance in rural Alaska? What partnerships could we explore to advance dual-use infrastructure? And how do we ensure that those investments deliver maximum value to communities over time? How do we maintain them? Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. I loved the specificity and the Alaska context that you presented. And I really appreciate the way you walked us through that. I want to now bring Tim Kalki from Sustainable Energy for Galena, Alaska, Inc., also known as SEGA, onto the virtual stage. Hi, Tim. Tim has served as SEGA's general manager since the organization's inception in 2014. He transitioned his career from teaching to sustainable energy after completing a master's degree in natural resource management from Oregon State University. Tim is now an environmental and sustainability PhD candidate at the University of Saskatchewan, and he works closely with the community to facilitate local energy planning initiatives. If you have any questions, as a reminder, you can put them in the chat and we will bring them into the conversation between Tim and Katie later. So welcome, Tim.
Well, thank you very much. As Vanessa said, Tim Kalki, General Manager, Sustainable Energy for Galena, Alaska. It is my honor to be asked to present here today a little bit about the former Galena forward operating base that was constructed and operated by the U.S. Air Force, and to be a representative of the community. For those who are not aware, Galena is a remote, roadless community, approximately 300 air miles west of Fairbanks, Alaska, located on the north bank of the Yukon River. And it would be critical to share the strong foundation that Galena has. Predominantly Koyukon Athabascan population, established not as a traditional village site, but rather as a site of mining activity in the 1920s, and then later became prominent with the presence of the U.S. Air Force and the construction of a military base, which will be the highlight of our presentation today. But that foundation of the elders, the traditions, and the culture of the Koyukon peoples is what is allowing Galena to be what it is today. The image on the lower right-hand side of the screen is a aerial of the Galena area. To the left of the picture, or the west, you can see the former operating base. And just south of the airstrip is what is locally known as Old Town. That is the site that Loudon Village moved to in the early 1900s. The air base is in the apex that is also represented with the blow-up image. Galena, being located on the Yukon River, is accustomed to spring flooding. There's been several significant events in the 1940s, again in the 70s, and then as recently as 2013. Those events sparked movement of much of Galena's residential locations and critical infrastructure like the school, power plant, so on and so forth, into what we call Newtown, which is located on the right-hand side of the image, or the east of the airstrip. During World War II, in support of the Lend-Lease Act, the air base was constructed. More than 1,000 service members were stationed in Galena at various times. The most significant period of activity was during the Cold War in the 1980s. It was in 1997 that the infrastructure was first used as a school, and the majority of the infrastructure has since been transferred to the ownership of the city in Galena in 2008. A little bit about the school, as I mentioned, in the late 90s, Project Education Residential School, or PERS, was founded. The first year they had 40 students. There was also a local K through 12 school. And so with the PERS school, not only did it serve as a residential services to those students, but also focused on the vocational training, skills in the trades. And it's that uniqueness or emphasis in the educational component of vocational training and career educational tech prep, that sort of thing, that has been the backbone of the residential school. In the early 2000s, that transferred and became the Galena Interior Learning Academy, or GILA, which is the form of which the school exists today. A point here being that the Galena City School District facilitates both, or not only a K through 12 school for local students, this regional boarding school, but also the Interior Distance Education Association, or the IDEA homeschooling program. And again, while educational activities were used on the former base, it was in 2008 that the city finally became owners and thus responsible for operating and maintaining the infrastructure. Now, as Vanessa mentioned in my introduction, that I started off in Galena as a high school teacher. But for folks who are familiar with remote communities in remote Alaska, you once you start to develop some roots in the community, you can find yourself doing all sorts of things, and uh, and that's how I find myself in the position of managing a nonprofit focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy, as well as sharing with you all a little bit about not necessarily the dual use, but a reuse of former military infrastructure. And so I can definitely provide a perspective based off the 17 years that my family and I have lived in Galena, but I thought it important as well to um, reach out to some of my community members and the leadership within Galena to collect some information to share with you all here. And so this next section will be the notes from the community, and I'll apologize that I'm going to glance away and read for you some highlights that I gleaned from individuals. So, for example, I reached out to a school board member and a Loudoun Tribe council member for feedback on this topic, and they wanted to emphasize to the group, that what has happened with the air base and the benefits that have come from it are great. Definitely, the positives outweigh the negatives, but at that same time, they wanted to highlight that Galena was a community with strong values and trajectory for the future before the Air Force Base. And there's definitely a sentiment that if the day was to come that the Air Force left, or B, the infrastructure was closed down entirely, that the community would continue to be strong and resilient. Assuming the responsibilities of the Air Force Base by the city definitely brings huge financial risk and liability, which is going to be emphasized several times throughout this presentation. With respect to community buy-in, uh, you know, it sounds as if there was certain folks who were definitely interested and positive about it, but definitely a thread within the lifestyle and the culture of wanting to keep things simple. And there was a fear that taking on ownership of such a vast infrastructure would change that way of life. There was also conversations, I don't want to use the word disagreement, but differing views on how the infrastructure should be used initially upon transfer, and even, I guess, back as early as they started using it as an educational facility, based off of what are we going to do with this. There were those that wanted to use it strictly for education and education only, while others saw the advantage of being able to leverage the infrastructure for economic development. Today, it is primarily used by the school to support the boarding school operations, and there's a sentiment that that is why it is continuing as it is today and not being parceled out with different economic development or entrepreneurial endeavors. I've received feedback from the city manager, Shonda Huntington, who is most intimately understands the challenges and the costs. So when the Air Force left and the city took this over, already the heat systems, the water systems, the sewer systems, many of them were already antiquated, outdated, and falling apart. And so that has been a continuous effort by the community, taking loans and things like this to be able to improve those critical infrastructure components, as well as support definitely from the state of Alaska and other agencies operating within Alaska for various efficiency improvements. It was noted that with respect to the condition of the infrastructure, that there has not been a significant amount of federal support. Other infrastructure elements include, I mentioned the heat, water, wastewater, bulk fuel being an issue, that those pipelines and tanks require cathodic protection. And then, of course, there's an issue with contamination of the soil in the nearby area and the groundwater, which really limits what can be done on the base. And then, of course, there's significant concern with that contamination then leaching out even underneath the protective dike that surrounds the airstrip in the old buildings. Superintendent of the schools definitely wanted to emphasize the positive elements that Gila and the Air Base have provided with respect to that infrastructure, and the boarding school has been able to bring regional equity in education to the region. Also emphasize that the community buy-in was not automatic. Accepting Gila and the transient population that comes into Galena to provide the support services in many instances, particularly with the teaching staff, but then also with the student population, that positive relationship has been something that's had to be developed over time. Also an emphasis of the partnerships between the city, between the school, the tribe, and many significant outside support services that have been required to systematically improve the infrastructure so they can continue to provide transformative services to public goods. The challenges of the air base, very much reflect the challenges that can be found in all remote communities and Alaska in general, with the high cost of fuels, high cost of electrical power generation and heating, as well as the limited capacity and long transportation lines in remote communities. Now, one element that is unique with the former Galena Air Base, in addition to the school, is heating such a large infrastructure. In 2008, the average annual fuel consumption to just heat Gila was nearly 250,000 gallons of imported diesel. That's difficult to store. And the community knew at that time that they had to find an alternative. One positive element for sure from the federal government was that when the Air Force departed, they did leave over 1.5 million gallons of fuel, which allowed the city to find a strategy for this problem. And one of the solutions was a collaborative formation of a nonprofit organization, or SEGA, which is the entity that I manage, which was founded initially to provide the woody biomass for what became the installation of a biomass heating or biomass boiler that complemented facility upgrades, distribution line upgrades, as well as domestic water line upgrades. And this has been a significant way of not always saving money on fuel, but definitely stabilizing the cost of fuel and bringing a wide range of value-added benefits to the community and to that infrastructure. And so using a local resource, hiring local people to heat the school has been going on for 10 years now. And again, emphasizing the importance of partnerships. This image here shows property owned by Ganiyu Limited, which is the regional native corporation that has supported this project and allowed us an area to harvest material for heating the school. And with respect to heat, with system upgrades that occurred and the changing of a fuel source, these results show that, formerly it was 230,000 gallons of diesel used, and now we're down to an average annual use of about 40,000 gallons.
That's incredible, Tim. I just wanted to jump in and let you know that you're coming up on time. So
Okay.
make sure that we don't miss any of the highlights that you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, you bet. No, I appreciate that. And so I guess somewhat in closing here, I suppose, the school has been a great contributor along with the risk, but the investments that have been made in the school, not just the educational services, but then also that heating system that I referred to, have been a form of economic development that has really increased our capacity. And so increased investment, increased capacity, increased equipment allows us to do all sorts of things. And so over the last 10 years, we've been able to improve our housing situation, building single family homes for the tribe's low income housing project, spurring activity in other endeavors such as using local material for construction, partnering with all of the community entities to address reduction of diesel use for the power generation. We started with a 50 kW pilot project and are in the midst of completing a 1.5 megawatt solar array, partnering with outside entities such as ASEP to explore harnessing energy from the river. And every one of these little things that we've been doing to increase activities in the community, overall helps increase the community well-being. And being in a position where we're able to, we've maintained our strong foundation, and rather than being reactive, being more proactive in addressing our challenges. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tim. I can tell you're becoming an academic, so we gotta move you through your slides. No, it was wonderful to hear all that you're doing in Galena and with Sega and the transformation that you've been able to make as a community over the last 10, 15 years. I think that the community energy planning section, which you had to gloss over, is really a big part of that. So I would love to have you back to share more about that another time. Up next, we have Larissa Syverson from Unalaska Corporation. Larissa lives and works in Unalaska, Dutch Harbor. They are a member of the Koalingan tribe and shareholder of the Unalaska Corporation. They were previously lands manager, where they worked with a variety of projects related to leasing and development for the community of Unalaska and the broader Unangam Ta Nungin, also known as the Aleut and Pribilof Islands, many of which require remediation of World War II contaminated lands. They've been, since last week, they have been promoted to president. So congratulations, Larissa. And we're so grateful that you have the time to come talk to us as you transition into a new role. And I think you have a really great perspective to share on dual use infrastructure. So welcome.
Thank you for that introduction. I did just come into a new role, so a few adjustments to make. Incredible presentation so far. I was hoping to give a brief introduction to Unalaska Dutch Harbor. I feel like we've been a dual use port since World War II, but never really officially embracing it until fairly recently. We've seen an increase, in Navy ships and other things. Okay, so if you've never been to Alaska, it's beautiful. This is obviously a summertime picture. The traditional name is Iluluk. Iluluk is the Unangak name, meaning half circle, referencing the beautiful arching beach that's downtown Unalaska right there, the original village site. Throughout the Unalaska island, we've got archaeological sites dating back 9,000 years. We're very proud of that we're that old. We're obviously an ancient trading route. In our archaeological sites, we've got beads from all over the world. So lots of trading going through the Unangam to Nungan, which is the Aleutian Pribilof Islands. We're a thriving seafood culture. We always have been. We're also very proud of that. We consider ourselves the heart of the Aleutians. We're basically a hub for a lot of the surrounding communities and even some northern communities up in Bristol Bay. We were colonized by Russia in the mid 18th century. We were sold to the US in 1867. And in 1942, we became a first class city right before World War II. So that's pretty eventful history there, but we're still thriving and we're proud of that. We feed the region and we also feed the world. If you've ever had a fish fillet, it's 99% chance it came through our port and from our waters. So this slide right here, I just want to point out this was an act of war. We were bombed by the Japanese in June 3rd, 1942, almost 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. We were attacked by Japanese bombers, and I think there was under 30 people that died, but it was an attack on U.S. soil. And further out, the island of Attu was taken by the Japanese, and the Attuan people were taken as prisoners of war to Japan. I'm sure there's a ton of World War II history I could get into, but what I'd like to kind of skip ahead to is some of the things that happened to our community as a dual use port at that time. The buildup was happening around 1939, and it was a very fast buildup where they basically needed to build about 4 forts within an Alaska Bay to protect the bay because we're a deep water port. In that process, they needed to make flat land, they needed to make roads, they needed to make a runway. So it was really happening really fast. In this picture here, before I move on, this was the tank farm area, which was immediately targeted and bombed. So all that black smoke that you see, that is the fuel burning. And as a response, an immediate response was to open up all the other tanks and just let them drain out so that so they wouldn't catch fire. So just a couple side notes there on how things go down when you're in an emergency. Our local subsistence resources were really impacted with the buildup. We had some herring spawning lagoons that were filled in to create flat land, and that really affects our subsistence and our food security. Salmon stream was completely rerouted and never really put back into place. So that really affected the salmon habitat. The Unalaska Lake salmon habitat, which was our main source of, red salmon, pink salmon, that was actually bluestoned a couple times. And if you're not familiar with what bluestoning is, it's just a very toxic substance that kind of kills everything off. Still trying to find out why that happened. So numerous sacred sites were looted and bulldozed actually to make way for bunkers and all the necessary items that you need to defend the port, right? The Japanese bombing targeted the bulk fuel facilities, as you saw in the first photograph, and it also targeted our hospital. And we haven't had one since. We are still working towards that because we are a hub community, and being 800 miles from Anchorage, if we could provide more health services, that would really make a huge difference for our smaller communities and ensuring that the smaller communities don't have to move so far away from their region. So the spilled fuel and the burning fuel and the PCBs continue to migrate through the watersheds even like 80 years later, creating health and safety issues, and it really slows down development or stops it completely. There is also a lot of unexploded ordnance that was left behind. It wasn't very well documented, especially since a lot of the forts were essentially abandoned. And so that continues to pop up throughout development and even environmental remediation processes where we didn't think there was going to be unexploded ordnance, but there just happens to be. So that slows things down quite a bit. So one really big thing that happened during World War II is that the local Unanga were forced to leave. Villages were not allowed to resettle when they returned years later. It was the same legislation that put the Japanese Americans into internment camps. The same thing happened to the Unanga people that were living in Unalaska. They were taken to Southeast Alaska and put into internment camps that were dilapidated and falling apart. And it was awful, and it was our local community, and really changed a lot of our adaptation processes that we already had in place. Our lands were then returned to us, but they were contaminated, which really further deteriorated our quality of life. So those are some heavy topics. I'm happy to follow up with anybody on those, one-on-one sometime. This is kind of just an overview of what OC deals with a lot. We have dump sites that were, equipment and things was used to bury and support, gravel and rocks and everything to build out roads and to stop erosion. Those sites are now being eroded even more, so they're being exposed, and it's like, okay, well, we got to go yank this part out now. This is one of the lagoons that was filled in. As you can see, it still wants to be a lagoon, so it's very flooded. This area was used during World War II. We don't know what material they used to fill it in, so we're doing some assessment there. Just an example of just some of the day-to-day stuff that the Unalaska Corporation deals with on a day-to-day basis. And so as a result of the abandoned equipment and other hazards that were left behind during World War II, the Unalaska Corporation, as one of the major landowners, we have to work to stop the expectation that it can continue. So it's kind of like a trickle-down effect, right? They think, oh, well, this area is already contaminated. We're just going to dump our stuff here and walk away. So we deal with that a lot. And I can tell you right now, this picture here, this costs us about $25,000 to clean up. So yeah, the trickle-down effect and the expectation is not as prevalent, but we're working on it. So moving forward, after World War II, we were left with a pretty incredible infrastructure. We had roads, we had ports, we had an airport. So today we are still a global shipping route. We're very proud of that. We have 7 separate bulk fuel facilities. I think they're all privately owned at this time. I'll have to double check. We have 5 seafood processing facilities. Trident has moved into an area called Captain's Bay. They are kind of in the process of building up. We're a safe haven for vessels in distress. We've had multiple vessels join our ports throughout the years just to get out of the weather. Maybe their power is completely gone and they just have to go somewhere. So we tow them in and we take care of them. We're a very scenic and popular tourist destination. As you can see, beautiful hiking trails. There's a really huge interest for World War II history, so people want to come to the island and see that. We have about 20 cruise ships a year right now, and that is steadily growing. So we'd really like to see that infrastructure grow as well. We also support a lot of marine research. Like I said, we are the heart of the Unungum-Tunungin. There's pollock, there's crab, there's all sorts of Arctic research support that we're available for. We also have the Navy, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the Air Force that really rely on this port for support. Not really as a base, but for support services, and that's really our strong suit. The U.S. Coast Guard, their MSD was upgraded to an MSU, which is a unit, in 2024, and that gives them a little bit more authority to make decisions quicker when there is an emergency. That means they have the personnel on island that can make those quick decisions without having to call like Anchorage or something. So that was pretty exciting. We have a very large fishing fleet. They go up to the border with Russia all the time for fishing, and the weather is bad. And so the Coast Guard, they are really taking care of us in that sense. So Unalaska Corporation, being the village corporation, we own most of the property in the Dutch Harbor area, all of Amacnac Island. We're working to expedite the remediation of contaminated lands so we can fully realize our land's potential and continue supporting the region and Alaska. We're working with industry leaders to study the cost of development and inter-island travel. A lot of that also has to do with garbage removal, heavy metal removal, things like that. We have renewable energy projects that are taking shape, starting to see a lot of support for geothermal on a regional level and biofuel production because of our fisheries. We have, I think, about 4 or 5 outfall lines in Unalaska Bay. And if we are able to kind of reroute some of that outfall into biofuel, that would really improve the health of Unalaska Bay outside of the contamination. So renewable energy, quality of life, and housing are 2 very motivating factors for determining the potential of our lands once we get them remediated. A lot of the contamination does fall in the marine industrial zones because, that's where the buildup happened for World War II. OC would like to influence the rise of dedicated transportation services to the Unangam-Tunangan. And the reason for that is, if we had a hospital, if we had better inter-island travel, people could stay in the region, which only helps our microeconomies. It helps families stay in the region. It helps our schools. And we really we want to incentivize that any way we can. Like I said, we do have a lot of global shipping routes coming through here. International facilities could really use some expansion. Some feedback I've had from the community so far is it would be really great to separate these international facilities for like the Canadian, the Japanese, and US navies when they need to come in. It's kind of disruptive to commercial and shipping and cruise ship. There's not enough space at our docks. So we're looking at ways to expand, obviously, for more vessel traffic, bigger vessel traffic. We have a couple, we have a couple museums here which really serve as international institutions, especially for a lot of our Japanese visitors that are coming to learn about World War II from a much different perspective. There's a lot to take away from here if you've never been here. So we'd like to really support that. And I think, when we're talking about dual port infrastructure in Alaska, Arctic security, facilities to support the presence of a national fleet for security and the Jones Act, we do have a lot of cold storage facilities here, and we need to make sure we're able to compete. Fisheries management, we have lab and research facilities, and one thing we're working on is improving the communications for our remote lands and resources. There are a couple remote salmon streams that have been robbed for years from outside vessels. So we're just now able to track that better, working with the Coast Guard and the state troopers. But it really is all about communications and remote surveillance. Geothermal power for dual port infrastructure in Alaska, it would be amazing if we could get that up and running, like in a couple of years for the local and global off-takers. There's a lot of talk about hydrogen production for, transitioning our vessels and our fleets for global shipping. So we're really excited to learn more about that. Port expansion and consistent port availability, again, when those cruise ships come in or when the Japanese Navy wants to come in or the Canadian Navy wants to come in, just making sure we have a space for them. The city of Unalaska is really dedicated to improving accessibility, not just for the ports, but also, sidewalks, things like that kind of infrastructure you need for increased amount of visitors. So they're doing some dredging projects inside the bay. We're pretty excited about that. I was hoping somebody from the city would be on today, but I didn't see anybody yet. So that's a brief overview of what we're doing, where we're at, and where we'd like to go. So thank you all. I'll keep it short.
Thank you, Larissa. I think that really brought a lot of perspective onto the conversations we've been having today and yesterday. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share. So we're going to welcome Katie and Tim to join Larissa on screen. And I would like to introduce Erin Whitney. Erin Whitney is from the U.S. Department of Energy, Arctic Energy Office, and will be moderating this conversation for today. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Vanessa?
You sound great.
Okay, terrific. Well, I just want to say thank you to Katie and Tim and Larissa for those really interesting and fascinating presentations, talking about everything from bulk fuel storage facilities to legacy military infrastructure and land contamination. There's a lot to unpack here. So I have a couple questions, and it looks like we've got some questions in the chat as well. So let me just start and ask, from a community perspective, what kind or kinds of ownership models for dual use energy infrastructure do you think would be most appealing for your communities, Larissa and Tim, and then Katie, for some of the communities that you work with? For example, there may be an inclination on the military side to own the infrastructure to ensure operational readiness and security, but that could also create access issues for community members. And I, at the same time, heard Tim say that, taking on ownership of facilities introduces liability and financial risks as well. I'd love to hear your perspectives on what you think might be an ideal arrangement, looking forward to dual use projects in terms of ownership models. And I'm happy to let any of you jump in first.
I can jump in. So what works right now is supporting our local operators and, local boots on the ground. When it comes to succession planning, I think having that dual infrastructure ownership is really important because it will help support each owner. The collaboration of a dual use facility, if it's military owned or they're collaborating together, with a port facility that is already in place, providing training, providing just, succession planning. I think that would be ideal. Supporting the local operators that are here already is very important to our community.
Okay, thanks. Tim or Katie, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I can piggyback on that a little bit, just with respect to, and I'm going to start to speak outside of my knowledge base just a little bit in terms of the agreement between the Air Force and the city and all the specific components, because there are, rumors that we hear every few years that the Air Force may reactivate and occupy the infrastructure, and that certainly makes one wonder how that would work. Based off my experience with the city and the people of Galena, I think the ownership structure of the city owning it is the preferred way in terms of increasing the sovereignty, the independence, the self-sufficiency, if you will. So the ownership part, maybe not necessarily what needs to be changed, but towards what Larissa was just stating, the condition of which it was transferred. There was, of course, that huge gift of the remaining fuel, so that can't be overlooked. But the condition of the heat systems, the sewer system, the interior building heat systems, all that kind of stuff was in dire need of repair. And one of the reasons probably that the Air Force chose to left because of the inefficiencies and the struggles, and that's a pretty big lift for a small community to accept. So those are some of my initial thoughts on your question there, Aaron.
So you're saying you prefer community ownership, but perhaps
With some more
with some more
support,
upgrades to facilities.
that's right, or avenues for support, and exactly.
Yeah, yeah. What about looking forward to future projects? Both of you have legacy infrastructures in your communities. I assume you would still envision community ownership or local ownership to be a preferred route. Is that correct? Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
that's correct. But having the collaboration for maintenance and upgrades, that would be huge.
Mhm.
mhm,
There's also there's also a level of protection that would come along with that. You know, as you saw from the photographs when the fuel tanks were essentially just targeted right away and bombed, and 85 years later, we're still cleaning up. There's still a lot of fuel on the ground. So having more security in place for the infrastructure is really important. I did pose a question earlier to the group about, we have a great marine vessel tracking system, but we don't really have one for drones. Even if, it would help if we knew what drones were in our area, even if it's not picking up every single drone, it's still good to know, like, oh, that one is not a threat. That's the sea mammal survey drone that comes out every July. Because I do get requests for more information on drones in our area. We're close to the border, so we have a lot of international ships coming through. Russia and China have been doing drills in our waters, close to our waters, and they're not just boats. I think every boat has drones. So if we could find a way to, protect our infrastructure against that sort of activity would be really ideal. And that would be one of the collaborations I would hope for.
Mhm, mhm. So are you saying that you see unidentified drones like coming
Yes.
within eyesight of the village? Okay. That's unsettling. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Katie, do you have something to add there?
I did. I guess Larissa kind of started going down that path a little bit. And obviously, I can't speak from the community perspective because that's Larissa and Tim here. But I think that the difficulties around scale and capacity in rural communities, I mean, right now we see that playing out in infrastructure that is difficult to fund and take care of over time, and it's really complicated. And so we're starting to think of how can we build virtual scale through, aggregating different aspects of operations and management at the regional level, perhaps. And I kind of wonder if that is also the right, maybe that could be a place to have conversations about dual use and creating structures higher than the community. So I'm probably not articulating this very well. I think that finding money for projects, and if the military can come in as a cost partner on expanding capacity or making improvements, that's just part of the equation. But how it's taken care of over time, I mean, that is still going to be a challenge. And so I guess I'm saying I would be interested in trying to figure out some creative solutions that are at a scale larger than the community, but where the communities are playing a very large role in trying to identify the actual need and making sure that they're a part of the process in figuring out plans for creating a dual use capacity or implementing that over time. I feel like I just said nothing at all, but I see Larissa nodding her head, so maybe you can
I'm
elaborate.
following. I'm
Okay.
following. Yeah. No, you hit it right on. Yeah, you got it.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I think we're all grappling with new possibilities and new questions. So it's the articulation is an evolving process. So thanks for making that effort, Katie. I hear you as well. Let's see here. There is a question in the chat here. What is the military's current role, if any, in cleanup and maintenance? Does anyone want to take that question?
I can jump on that real quick, and that would be an area where I would applaud the federal government and the Air Force in not in all of the contamination that they caused, but in the remediation efforts that they've been doing since the transfer. So every summer there are projects that hire local equipment operators and laborers to help with evacuating contaminated soil, installing monitoring wells, various projects related to that issue. And it's a time-consuming process, but a place where we still, have a very active presence with, contractors who are associated with the Air Force who come in and do that work.
Mm-hmm. Similar, except for I think probably because of our remoteness, being off the road system, it's a very slow process. Some of our sites have been monitored heavily for 50 years. And then the mobilization effort is very expensive. So you end up spending maybe triple the amount to do the same amount of work. So in that respect, we do try to hire locally, and we pursue funding to do our own cleanup on our lands. We try to limit the amount of institutional controls. We try to clean it up as best as we can. I think there's room for improvement on the Army Corps of Engineers and their environmental remediation services that they provide to the Aleutians. That inter-island travel aspect is huge, and utilizing equipment and contractors in the region would be better. I would support that. And maybe just, if you're mobilizing to clean one hazardous material instead of demobbing and shutting down operations to move on to a different category of material, it might be a good idea, since you're already mobilized, to clean up everything from that first category that you started. Like, example, if it's asbestos, maybe try to do all the asbestos, since you already have everybody, all the certified personnel, things like that. So there's room for improvement, and they are really working with us on that. And I'm really grateful for the adaptability for the cleanup process in the Aleutians. Looking forward to some thinking outside the box too for some of our really deep contamination, where we don't necessarily want to dig up the whole island, but maybe we could work with some other techniques to get it clean.
Great, thanks. Katie, did you want to add to that? I see you're off mute.
No, I just didn't mute myself again. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, totally fine, totally fine. Just full disclosure here, I prepped some questions for our panelists here, and I want to take a risk here and ask a question that I didn't run by you all beforehand. Katie, you talked a lot about bulk fuel infrastructure, and yet we heard from Larissa that those facilities, were bombed in World War II, and they were seen as targets. Do we need to be thinking about future infrastructure investments in terms of potential targets, and how might that inform the types of infrastructure we might want to think about pursuing? So I understand, we have a bulk fuel storage crisis. If we were able to shore up all of those storage facilities, yes, they're critical to the community, but do they also create more targets in a military sense? And are there alternatives to that we should be thinking about?
Can I Can I start? I think I'm probably going to have the smallest or the shortest comments here. I suspect Larissa will have a lot to say, but I love those questions, Erin, and I think that exactly points to one of the needs, one of the strongest reasons why community involvement in this process from the very start of starting to think about which communities might have a location that is beneficial to a defense purpose and where infrastructure might be poised to serve that dual use. They have to be a part of it because they're the ones who might be put more at risk. I've asked this question a few times internally here and with others, and it kind of sounds like some folks, and I would love to hear a Department of Defense person respond to that as well. Um, there's already a high level of risk in Alaska to our communities, regardless of whether their infrastructure serves a dual use purpose or not. I mean, we are hearing a lot about cyber risk in our electric utilities, and they don't serve a dual use purpose because there are bad actors who might just want to mess with us. Um, and so I think that's a conversation that has to start at the very bottom with communities. And the other thing I wanted to say is that not all those tank farms on the map I showed that AEA, that beautiful story map AEA put together, I think there's probably only a handful of communities where a dual use purpose is actually maybe a beneficial consideration to the Department of Defense. But again, I'm not a defense person, so I would defer to somebody who can speak to that. But I suspect we're talking about a pretty small number of communities where there is real dual use potential.
Anything from Larissa or Tim on that topic?
Yeah, just from the feedback I've received from some of our port operators and actually local communications, we're really interested in this topic too, is, we have other bays and we can separate to a certain degree the facilities if we needed to. But that would take some really the logistics and the planning would really have to start now for building up in a separate bay that doesn't have the infrastructure that an Alaska Bay has.
Mm-hmm.
But it does also, it has the deep water ports and things like that. So just separating them is one way to do it, right? To make it safer but still effective.
Right.
Creating that space, freeing up port space for commercial use, but still having it in the location that it's at to serve as a support port for other bases. We've got ADAC and Shemya that are, Shemya is still operational for Air Force, and ADAC, I think the Navy still owns property out there. So anything we can do to support their operations is, that's really what we do. We just support people. And then when they get into trouble, we bring them in and we fix them up.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Tim, anything to add there? Certainly no pressure.
Oh, not necessarily with respect to the tank farms that supported Air Force operations. They're decommissioned, emptied, and in the phases of going away and being mothballed. The airstrip itself, I could see that being a target and something to be considerate of with advanced technology these days. I don't know if the military would have a need to utilize that airstrip as a refueling depot anymore. And so I'm not sure how much of interest there would be. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And a final question. The military historically, will scale up and can scale down, or, will scale up operations very quickly. Is there a way to think about dual use community energy infrastructure in a modular sense, in order to accommodate those sort of swift changes in operational needs? For example, how could infrastructure be constructed quickly and easily to scale up or down in size or capacity? Is that something that we could concretely think about for any applications in any of the communities we've heard about today?
So I did make note yesterday of one of the presenters talking about, having at least 14 days of backup power, 100% backup power, right? For if there's disruptions. I think that's a really good place to start, even if it's backup gensets or maybe even just a solar array for something really specific, like the clinic or the hospital. Uh, those seem to be really useful for those kinds of situations, providing that 100% backup power for 14 days. Like she said, that's where they start. Yeah, so I did make note of that. And
With respect to this question, Aaron, I can have two thoughts. One is along the lines of power generation as well. My understanding being that the Air Force also provided some diesel generators for the city overall power production, and they were very much oversized once the Air Force left, which caused a certain level of inefficiency because of their size, which then knocked the city of Galena, which is the utility, out of participation with the PCE program for a number of years. So that was an unintended consequence of a gift that turned out to not be the best solution. So modular power generation definitely would be one. The other, and I think you see it reflected on what has happened between segmenting critical infrastructure. And I've completely failed to mention that Department of Transportation and Public Facilities and the FAA control all of the airstrip itself now. So that is not under the ownership of the city. That's an important part. When I'm speaking of the base, I guess I'm got my blinders on a little bit, and I'm thinking about the buildings that are occupied by the school. But that too has been downsized to get my train of thought here, separating critical infrastructure and then all of the housing, right? And that's kind of what has happened. The critical infrastructure and 2 dormitories or barracks have been partitioned with the school, and the rest of the housing has all been transferred over to the Bureau of Land Management. And that's another significant dual use that we see here in Galena is the Alaska Fire Service and BLM having a base here in Galena to be able to respond to during the fire season each summer.
Great, thank you. And there's some comments about modularity with regard to broadband in the chat as well. However, we are out of time right now. I want to say thank you again to Katie, Tim, and Larissa for the wonderful presentations and the stimulating discussion. I am going to hand it back over to Vanessa, and I might just ask, are we allowed to ask the panelists to put contact info in the chat for folks to follow up? It looks like there's a number of questions for the panelists or just desires to connect. So with that, thanks again, Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that panel discussion. We're now going to shift away a little bit from community, but hopefully we're still going to focus on community as we move forward. And we will be hearing from the Army and Air Force about perspectives on federal and defense levels as we continue this exploration of dual use infrastructure. We'll start with Dave Lineberger from the U.S. Army. Dave assumed the role of Chief of Army Community Partnerships in July 2024. In this position, he encourages innovation and collaboration between our installations and local communities to develop partnerships that are mutually beneficial, identify cost efficiencies, reduce installation service response times, and strengthen the relationship with the local communities outside of our installations. So we are continuing on in this vein, and welcome, Dave.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. My name is Dave Lineberger. I am the Chief of Army Partnerships. Can you, Vanessa, confirm to me you can
Yes,
hear me?
I can hear you and see your slides. Looks great.
Excellent. So I'm told I have 10 minutes and 7 minutes has already expired. So I will try to be less than 10 minutes, but a few minutes more than the 3 minutes I think that I actually have. So what do? I do public partnerships for the Army. Anything outside of the gate that's either state or below. So if we were to do something with, say, the University of Alaska or the state of Alaska, then that's the kind of thing that I do. My program is focused on the chiefs of staff of the Army's top priorities. This is quality of life, cost savings, trying to improve services for our soldiers, families, civilians, family members. We try to strengthen the relationships between the installations and the local communities. And then, of course, what we always try to do is we try to, if there's a better way of doing it, improve the process. I think everybody agrees that's the right way to doing things. Now, everybody knows that when dealing with our federal government, there's lots of bureaucracy built into it. Some of that is intentional. Some of that is unintentional. And working with the Department of Defense, any one of the military departments can be challenging. My office is charged with helping the partner get to yes. So all of the services have several tools at their disposal. This includes cooperative agreements, mutual aid agreements, grants, licenses, leases, TAAs, MOAs, intergovernmental support agreements, MOUs, and enhanced use leases. Many people understand what some of those are. Few understand what every one of those are. I've been assured, and Vanessa, if you'll confirm to me, that everyone will have access to these slides. So I have about a 40-minute presentation that I'm going to blow through in about 8 minutes. I'm doing that intentionally.
Slides? Yep, you're good.
And everyone's going to get the slides afterwards. So they are information packed. So I'm not really good at reading slides, but I'm good at giving you slides and letting you figure out what it is you want to pull from it. Some of the things that we focus on is the intergovernmental support agreements. An intergovernmental support agreement, that's where we take a federal contract and we select non-competitively under 2679 a public partner to provide that service. What you're looking at is a picture of the governor of Texas and the senior leaderships from all the services. The state of Texas now does road maintenance, road repair, road striping, road replacement for DOD. The military is good at doing things like blowing things up and killing people, but running road repair crews is not something that's in our core competency, nor should it ever be. So we reach out to the partner who should be doing it. In this case, it's the Department of Transportation within Texas, and they are doing that. IGSAs were started in 13. Each year, we have made improvements to the authority that allows us to do more and more things. Currently, the Army, this number is about a month old, so I'm going to say it's around 185 now. And we have 185 IGSAs that we've replaced federal contracts with these IGSAs. And the Army is saving around $110 million. And we, every single year, and we have done one-time cost avoidances cumulatively of about 50 million. Now, this is just the Army savings. The public partner also saves money because it's a win-win. We take our requirement, such as cutting grass or whatever the service is, on top of the public partner's requirement, and they have more purchasing power because it's scalable. And we also pay the full overhead fee that allows them to pay somebody to manage the program for the Army and for their individual city, municipality, parish, whatever the local term is for a local government across the 50 states and 5 territories. Now, what do? we work with all levels of government, both on the Army side and the OSD and Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Space Force. And these are offices that we partner with. And we also have an active role. Like the very bottom, the Joint Services Partnership Committee, there's a Dave on the Air Force, on the Space Force, on the Navy, the Marines. All the services have somebody just like me. We sit on a Joint Services Partnership Committee, and we look over each other's shoulders to see what are you doing, because I'm going to steal your program and I will share mine. It's a win-win situation for everybody. We have lots of partnership concepts. These are actual IGSAs that are in place. Software development, road maintenance repair, I've already spoken about that. Life skills services that we have up in Fort Drum, New York. Computer aided dispatch. This is something that all installations are required to have. Outside of the gate, all of the cities, counties, municipalities, parishes, everybody has these. Bulk purchasing, such as salt. We might need that up in Alaska. Base ops, all different types of municipal services. And then we have regional IGSAs where multiple installations can all partner on one IGSA. We do that across the Army, and we also do that with the other services, with the Air Force and the Navy, Marines. The JSPC is exactly what I described. There's one of me on each of the services. We partner with each other. Our goal is to establish regional partnerships and promote policy within the services to support each other. I'm the lead for the Army when it comes to DCIP, the Defense Community Infrastructure Program. I think I read on the agenda that OLDCC spoke to you earlier, and I'm the Army rep for that. I'm not going to go too much into it because I think you've already seen it, but each year you've seen it's grown in value, and not just monetary value, but they've gotten really savvy in figuring out how to work with local governments to help develop your requirement. And each of these slides here are a listing of all the projects that have been awarded. The one thing I do want to stress to you is military value. When doing your DCIP packet, make sure it ties to military value. It's good that we're talking installation resilience. It's good that we talk quality of life, but it's strictly factual. You can max out on quality of life at 22 points, and you will not compete at all with a military value of 42. So the quick answer is you need to make sure that there's military value. You can have multiple ones of these, but if it's not military value, you don't stand a chance. Key takeaways. You should always have a commander's letter of endorsement. It should tie to military value. It has to be outside of the installation. DoD has a process for building things on base. It's called the MILCON process. This is so we can build things outside of the base. You have to get a lot of the requirements done, such as zoning, environmental design, things of that nature. It should already be taken care of before you submit. And it's always good to put some skin in the game. If you're asking the DoD to pay for a $10 million project, it's good that the submitter is also submitting a little bit of money, not, nothing big, but at least that you're invested in the project. We talk about outside of the box or unique IGSAs. This is always important. How can private businesses get involved? Work with your local small business office for the Army. I've listed our points of contact here. And I'm happy after this to either take questions, or you'll have my contact information, reach out, and I can help you develop a process to work with IGSAs. That is the program, and I am at 8.5 minutes.
Impressive. 8.5 minutes. I love it. Well, thank you very much, Dave. And yes, we'll turn now to Richard Hartman from the U.S. Air Force. as Chief Innovation Officer within the U.S. Air Force Office of Energy Assurance. Richard is responsible for energy security initiatives for the Air and Space Force. As Chief Innovation Officer, he identifies and develops strategies to deploy innovative solutions to enhance energy resilience worldwide, with global partners in academia, in industry, and governments through partnerships to get energy resilience projects approved, solicited, and or built, which is, the real work. Richard holds a PhD in policy and management and has held adjunct faculty positions at George Washington University and Georgetown University. He is a board member of various public and private sector boards where he advises startups as well as well-established companies. Welcome, Richard.
Hey, thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, Dave. I appreciate you all inviting me to this. As you're probably aware, and this is really sort of a shout out to Aaron, is that we have a significant interest in Alaska for several reasons, and I'll probably get into those either in this portion of the session now or in the panel discussions. So unlike Dave, who does have a very focused initiatives that he works on, I'm a little broader than that from the perspective that we look at innovation and how it affects resilience on military installations throughout the globe. For those of you who aren't aware, and I want to focus on Alaska though, but we have over 200 installations in the Air Force and Space Force. Our office focuses on energy, and this is not going to be about complete infrastructure or overall infrastructure effects. We're very specific to energy infrastructure. Is that we oversee all Space Force bases, all Air Force bases, all reserve bases, as well as some mission critical guard units within the United States. So for us, what's important to us? Resilience, resilience, and resilience. I think you'll hear from some of other military components, they'll look at reliability and they'll look at efficiencies. I don't mean that those are not important, but it really gets down to ensuring that we're mission effective. What differs us probably from other probably military components is that no one installation really focuses on a mission. So in Alaska, for example, we have radar sites that are used to intercept and understand what potentially is coming our way. But then that would connect to another probably site that would intercept, that would actually try and defeat that adversary, or we might use that site that might reach out to aircraft to do certain kinds of activities. So no one installation does the entire mission, and that's where our main focus is. As far as innovation, I think about it in three ways. I think of it not just technology, but business models, business processes, and any permutation. The energy world is very, very complex. When I came into this world, I thought the healthcare world was complex. The healthcare world is extremely easy compared to energy. Why do I say that? We have 3 grids. We have 3,000 utilities. We have 50 states and 12 or 13 territories. Don't count, don't quiz me on that. And then we also have a global presence that's there. So we also have to deal with other states, entities. And so it gets very complex for us to complete our mission. I think a lot of people feel that the Department of Defense has a lot of money to perform its mission, and it does. And most of those dollars, if you're watching, if you've been paying attention, even throughout before the new administration, those dollars goes towards weapon systems. And you're actually seeing that with the new administration. So the new administration, you've probably heard about the Golden Dome. So you're going to see, I think for Alaska and for some of our northern states, you're going to see more significant interest in there in dollars going that way. When we talk about communities, I think most people feel that military people and the feds that support that live on the military installation. The reality of it is 80% or more of the military and or civilian population live outside the base. So we have a strong impetus to work with the communities and to ensure that any energy demand signals that we have do not inhibit that, because it inhibits the community as well. I'll give you an example in Guam. And how this sort of works to give you sort of a feel if there's in Guam, for those of you may or may not be aware, they do have some intermittent energy problems. And what ends up happening is that the people outside the base, they have that issue. But then what ends up happening for us, if we have that, then that turns on our generators. So if we can fix problems outside the fence line, then that helps us inside the fence line for emissions, but also makes that community and the lifestyles of our members less interruptive. So we have been very focused on Alaska for a couple of reasons. One, on the innovation side of the house, and I'll talk a little tech here, is that we believe, and I think you all know, is that your natural gas peak is coming up soon. So you have to find different energy resources. We believe that not only do you have the critical minerals to supply some of our very immediate needs for the new generation of either AI for our military aircraft and mission support, but also we believe that you have a new primary energy resource called geologic hydrogen that's there that can either be found like natural gas in a reservoir or stimulated or fracked like a natural gas is. So you're Senator Murkowski, and we're hoping that Senator Stevens, is it Stevens or is it, sorry, help me out here, folks. I deal with all 100 of them. So Sullivan, sorry. It used to be Stevens when I was a young captain, a long time ago. Sorry there. So Senator Sullivan starts understanding, because he's on the Senate Defense Senate. God, it's been a long day here. The Senate Arms Committee. There we go. And so we hopefully that he starts understanding that as well. So we believe that Alaska can be one of the states that can create that new energy resource. Now, why is that important? If we have that commodity on the military installation, then that would relieve any of our energy demands to the community and allow them to have that. Maybe that brings down tariffs too as well. So that's something of interest for us. We do believe too, there's some things that we're trying to work in, and Dave and their team at Army have been just killing it with the OLDC folks. We're finally starting to work with them a little bit to find out how can we, use some of their what's called installation readiness programs to work with the communities to identify energy resilient solutions that help the community as well as the military installation. So we're very interested in Clear Space Force Base, that we believe there's some opportunities there because we have a new mission set that's coming up. And then at Elmendorf, we believe too that there might be, for example, some tidal energy opportunities there that can help with the community, but also Elmendorf. So there's a lot of opportunities. Alaska is really has led the nation in many areas, and we like to work with Alaska to continue that frontierism that Alaska has. I think it's probably easier for us to have a discussion than for me to tell what you do. But again, probably unlike Dave, who is focused and then has probably a broader perspective on infrastructure than we do, I'm very focused on energy, installation energy, and then working with communities and engagement with communities, the utilities is extremely important because none of these complex issues can be resolved by any one entity. So I'll leave it at that, if that's okay, and to be respectful for time.
Great, thanks. And if we can bring Dave back online too, that would be fabulous. Okay, thanks, Dave and Richard. So now we're kind of heading into the Q&A portion of this. And I will just kick it off, throw you guys the softball connections, but what's the best way to get a hold of you? Are you on your way up to Alaska, either for the Sustainable Energy Conference or the Alaska Defense Conference or any events like that?
I will be there for the Alaska Defense Forum, and I believe I'm working with the University of Alaska Fairbanks to do a specific IGSA workshop on the day after ADF. And then, of course, my contact information is in the slide deck, and I will drop my email and phone number inside the chat for everybody. I'm pretty open to the public.
And Jeremy, I'll actually probably be at the same conference, Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference. That's going to be the first week of June. So I'll be up there. And I was up there not too long ago. I think it was about half a year ago for the geologic hydrogen conferences up there at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Regarding me, there is a way to work with us through the office. So I prefer that way. Be honest with you, so if we do it that way, that would be probably helpful. But if there's anyone that wants to reach me, please, I would suggest you go through Aaron Whitney or maybe some of the other folks, and you'll have complete access to me. We're very open, but as you're aware, very busy. And with the new administration, things are very uncertain. There's a lot of fluidity, and there's a lot of hot things that we're trying to work, specifically in the nuclear side of the house, natural gas in those areas on the energy side. So not trying to be not transparent, but we'll give you a way to get through us. And I might not be the right person in our office. We're a pretty big office.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand and respect your I'm shocked that Dave gives out all this information, but hey, it's his inbox.
If I'm not the right person, I will point you to who the right person is.
Okay, great. And I guess maybe expand, Dave, a little bit on, you mentioned kind of your sister agencies. Air Force has a similar office, Tony Ann. Space Force, do they have one as well, or?
They are standing up a partnership office right now. Tony Ann Fisher covers both.
Okay, and Navy as well?
Navy had Paula Monticelli, and she took the fork in the road option to retire early. So they are in the process of identifying who's going to backfill that position. But yes, they do have an active program.
Okay, great. So I guess since we've got you here, you're probably going to be the victim of all these reach outs. And I guess backing up a little bit, I know there's a number of strategy documents. There's an Arctic strategy. There's Arctic strategies for, I think, all the services right now. Are those a good place to start if folks are wondering, what makes sense to talk with installations about, or should we wait? I mean, I'm guessing there's going to be new strategies coming out. The new administration's priorities are different than the old administration's. Or what's kind of the best place for folks to really start learning the language, filtering the ideas before they get to you? Those kind of basic things.
Dave, if
Rich, you want to go first?
I'll go first. Again, so I think Dave has got a broader perspective on infrastructure than I do, and then actually the programmatics that lead to the community aspects. On the energy side of the house, what I would suggest people do with the new administration, if they're interested in energy infrastructure, is to look at Executive Order 14154 and Executive Order 1456. And these were both initiated the 20th of January. The first one was the 154 was about energy dominance. And then the second one was the energy emergency directive that's come out. Since then, there have been several others that have come, but I think to look at those to start off with. And then also there's an executive order that's very specific to Alaska too. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue here, but to talk about on the critical mineral side of the house, and then also looking at natural gas and fuels and the fossil fuel world there. On the Arctic side, I think the best way to do is for us to work together with the commission, and then people like Aaron, and on the DOE side of the house, so work with Mark Myers, or work with Aaron, because I think they have two different functions there to better understand, because we do have a president that is thinking about Greenland, and we actually have a military presence there in Thule, Greenland, our base that's out there. And so I think we need to sort of read the tea leaves and see what's happening. Also, we need to be very concerned too, I think, because Carney was just met with the president yesterday, the new prime minister over at Canada. But Canada has a significant military mission sets that are applicable to us too, for intercepts, again, for missile intercepts and things of that nature, just like the radar systems that you have up there. So I think what we need to do is sort of read the tea leaves. And I've talked to our Canadian friends. I haven't had opportunity to talk with any people from Denmark, but to keep those relationships, see what's going on, and then work through the appropriate activities of the Department of Energy and or with the commission, and then work through the departments that way. That's the best way to do it. And I'll just give you another example for us how it works and how sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes we'll have someone that goes to the base commander and they have a great idea for him or her, and then they're ready to go, right? So then it comes up to headquarters who oversees all that stuff, and we don't know what you're talking about. Vice versa. Headquarters has this great idea and they want to do something, and they go down and tell the base and they pounce on the base. And it doesn't work real well that way. What we try to do in our office is that we go to all the military installations. We have a pretty good understanding what the energy gaps are, and we have good relationships with each one of the installations. So we ask that, try to use, I don't want to sound like a bureaucrat because I'm definitely the furthest thing from one. And I think some of the folks that know me can vouch for that. But I think the best approach is to use the process first, especially right now with a lot of uncertainty that we have the new administration because things change. I literally just got done working on a handful of executive orders on nuclear, pre-decisional EOs on nuclear, for example. And you're aware that we have a potential nuclear activity out there, Eielson. So that's a long answer for my suggestion would be work through your channels, and then they'll work through us because we have very good relationships with them. So I'll pause.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective. A lot of what I spend my time doing is negotiating different levels of bureaucracy. There's a subtle art to it, or maybe sometimes it's not so subtle. But Dave, do you want to add to anything there?
Sure. So the way the Army operates, we have the active component, we have the reserve, the Army Reserve, and we have the Army National Guard. In Alaska, we have all three that are that have an active role in the defense of the nation and the state. And with the Army in Alaska, we have Fort Greely, Fort Richardson, and Fort Wainwright. Fort Greely sort of in the middle of the state. Wainwright is up in Fairbanks, and Richardson is down in what's your big city down in the bottom left?
Anchorage.
Post. Anchorage. Thank you very much. Once again, just like Richard, I deal with all 50 states. So the in Anchorage. So those are, if you're looking to engage at the local level, Richardson, Greeley, and Wainwright, contact the PAOs, and then they will put you in touch with the appropriate garrison staff that whichever, it could be public works. If it's in the public works, it can be the energy sector, the infrastructure, the environmental piece, whatever you're looking for, they can put you in touch with that garrison POC. When we deal with things on a national level, if you're trying to enter at the national level to understand what today's strategy is, I've included the link for the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Environment, and Energy. And the website is right there. And that'll take you to all of the, you can go up to OSD, so across all the services, or you can dwell into how to operate within the Army environment. That link is a good starting point to point you in the right direction.
Thanks, Dave. And I'll hop to the chat here. We've got a question. I think this is a question towards you, Richard. When you were talking about Senator Sullivan, and you talked about the geologic hydrogen. So the question is, can you repeat the term of the energy type that you mentioned was a newer option being presented to Alaskan senators? I think maybe, could you talk a little bit about geologic hydrogen there?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to. So geologic hydrogen hydrogen as a primary energy source has been around since the dawn of time. We just haven't been looking for it. A lot of this interest in geologic hydrogen stimulated from an activity in Mali, Africa, where the commodity was, they actually found they were looking for water. And then what ended up happening is they found this other reserve. And what happened was that that's what sort of spurned the interest that in it. because natural gas and oil companies, when they're looking for fossil fuels, they were looking for fossil fuels because they weren't thinking of hydrogen as a new resource that's there. There's two ways that it can be, utilized. It can be utilized as a reservoir, and I'm going to oversimplify these things. And I'm sure there's probably a geologist on this call that will feel free to correct me here, but that's okay. But there's basically two ways of doing. Is either as a reservoir, like natural gas or like water, and you can extract it. One of the concerns there, we don't know, really the classification of the reservoirs, and no one's really been able to do this right now, or of the reserves to see how much of it's there. The other way, which we believe is going to be impactful in Alaska, is through basically fracking serpentation. So basically, you just have iron ore, and the water reacts with it, and it creates hydrogen. Simple chemistry that's there. And there just happens to be a lot of that in Alaska. And it appears, from what we are seeing, is that the geology in Alaska is ripe for that now. So that's it, and that's the serpentization is how that occurs. So it can be either, and that's very similar to those on the call are familiar with geothermal energy, which we're running, those projects, many of those projects right now within the Department of Defense, using existing. What's really good about this geothermal energy, you have to really go deep for that. So we're talking maybe 4 to 6 to 10,000 kilometers. For geologic hydrogen, it's more around the lines, we believe, for natural gas. So it would be a boon for the Alaskan industry that's there, because you're utilizing the same, the same workforce, the same technologies. Basically, there's some nuances associated with it because of the brittleization of hydrogen and pipes with the boreholes and things of that nature. But if we believe it's going to work out, the word has been, there's enough. Even if you do 1% of what we believe is available, could power the world for I think they say even centuries. That's here. So what we try to emphasize is that the U.S. led in oil in the late 1800s. We've led in shale in the 2000s. And believe it or not, we're lagging right now between Russia and China on geologic hydrogen. There are a lot of, because they don't have to worry about permitting, they don't have to worry about other things. But one thing that we do very, very well is we drill. And this ties very close into the president's, mantra, drill, baby, drill. So we're hoping that that message is going to get there. We know that Senator Murkowski has been a strong vocal advocate for it. But she does not sit on the Senate Arms Committee. Sorry, now my brain's starting to work here. But Sullivan does. And if we can get that word to him, then that'll be important. There are going to be some important confirmation hearings that happen this week that we're hoping that Senator Murkowski or Senator Murkowski will, because this is going to be in front of the National Resources and Energy Committee, ask the question to some of those folks at DOE. And we'll see how that works. But when the president starts talking about this, then I think you're going to see Alaska really be an area. One other thing that for those in Alaska may not be aware of, the USGS created a map of geologic hydrogen for the lower 48. Your Senator Murkowski told us, suggested, I'm not going to say what she did or didn't, but suggested to USGS that maybe you should look at Alaska. And guess what they're doing? They're looking at Alaska. We believe, and I think that Jeff Ellis is going to be at your meeting, I believe, that he will be showing that map at your meeting, I believe. So we're hoping that'll happen. So we're very excited about that. So that, I don't know if that's the answer that the person was asking, or if they wanted more, but we're very excited, and we believe that Alaska could be at the forefront of it. So.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, and I think Jeff is, maybe Aaron, you invited him, I think, for the Sustainable Energy Conference. I think that's the intent, to get that map out in front of people. Great. And then I'll switch to the chat again. There was one more question here. Please give us your thoughts on microgrid development in remote Alaskan communities. Would that support DoD initiatives in partnerships with communities?
I'm going to move that over to David, because I know that the Army at one time was going to put a grid on every military installation. So we'll see.
So the Army does have a goal of putting a microgrid, at least a microgrid on every installation. Currently, we have 23. And as we all know, a microgrid is just a self-contained grid that can produce electricity or energy in a self-sustaining manner. Typically, most of our microgrids are based off of generators. And the goal is to be able to be self-sufficient in times of crisis for up to 2 weeks. There are various types of microgrids, and there is not one solution that works for everybody. One would say, well, let's just go with solar. But if you don't have solar, Alaska during the winter, maybe solar is not the option for you. And then when you throw all your eggs in one basket, for example, Houston had a solar field of, I believe, 400 acres. And last year, during a hailstorm, the entire solar field was wiped out. So once again, there is not a solution that fits everybody, but having a combination of existing resources, such as we all have the ability to put together something with fuel and generators, and new technologies. Richard, I will tell you, I don't know jack squat about the hydrogen process that you just described, but I'm excited, and I want to write my senator and say, you better map out Alaska. And if you're saying that 1% can power us for the next, be it 1 year, and you're saying in potentially centuries, obviously this is an area we need to look at. And the Army is looking to follow the Air Force's lead that you have up in Alaska with some of the other garrisons right now in the lower 48. Potentially Alaska in the future for a nuclear option when it comes to a microgrid. Richard?
Yeah, and I think to add to David, and thank you, I'm glad we got a little excited about that. So what you all may or may not be aware of, we work very closely with our other military components. I think energy is the one place, and infrastructure, I would say the same. A building's a building, basically. And I think we still use the same UFSC codes, doesn't matter what service you're in. But for us, we're working very closely with the Army on geothermal energy and the Navy as well. So Michael Jones and Bob Hughes's office working very closely with them. And you're probably aware they have an activity up there, I think, at Wainwright, a geothermal energy project. They're working with Tavera, some I can't remember the name of the company, something like that. Tavera, maybe, I can't. There's a lot of these weird names for companies these days, but working closely with them. And then also, just for your situational awareness, I've already sort of talked to, for David, so Jeff Waxman and I are close. So let him know. I know he's big on nuclear, but trying to get him on the hydrogen bandwagon as well. But regarding microgrids, David was right on target. Airbnb installation is a little bit different. There's no one solution set. So what we try to do is find the solution set that meets that need. Now, I will say, I just heard Bob Hughes talking about that the Army wants to have the ability to island in all their areas. And I think it's the same thing for us as well, because we just saw what happened over in Portugal, Spain, in South France. We just saw what happened over in Heathrow, where a substation was taken out, and then it just completely took out either half of a country or half of several countries, or a complete aircraft operation. So we've got to be very aware of that. And I think the other thing that we're observing with the new administration, they're recognizing that everything's dependent on energy. And the infrastructure part of it, though, too, we have to make sure that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are living, well, if it's inside the fence line or outside the fence line. So there has to be, and I want to try and redirect us to the dual infrastructure portion of it, is that we're a community. And I think that's been observed for many, many years for the military, is that we all work together. We're all in the same family. While the military is transient, our federal workforce is not. And they're the ones that are really the backbone to that relationship between the community and the installation. So we see how important that is. And we not only try to maintain that, we try and enrich that. But on the microgrids, it really depends on that. But I think all the military components are trying to figure out how can we island, because we can't afford to have a blackout that affects us. I will add on one other point is that we are required by the Department of Defense. We have resilience requirements. There's 6 nines for critical. That's 35 or 36 seconds in the entire year that it can be an operation can be down. So that sort of lets you know about how important it is for us to ensure that we have that continuous ability to fulfill our mission needs. So,
hey, Richard, if you don't mind, I just want to add one point to this. This is from an Army lens. It's important that we have the microgrids on the Army installations because we have to have what we call continuity of operations. But 75% of our service members reside off base in the communities. And as Richard pointed out, all of our civilians reside off base in the communities. So when we're looking at the dual infrastructure, if we don't have a solid infrastructure network with redundant capabilities and resiliency that relies on each other, we might have a military base that's operating, but if everything outside of the gate has collapsed, the soldiers and civilians are not going to leave their homes and leave their spouses and children in a vulnerable position to come work on base. For a short term, they will. We will try to accommodate what we can on the base. But in order to operate on base, it is critical that we work with our partners off base because we can't do on base without our partners off base. That is a reoccurring thing that all of the services recognize. And this is one of the reasons we have such a healthy partnership program throughout all the military departments.
And
Thank
David,
you, Richard.
here's your fist pump.
Yep, and actually, I wasn't going to throw one service under the bus, but here he goes. I had a young officer who that I was talking with a number of years ago, and he basically made a disparaging remark about how one base will go home if something happens, and it's like, well, you can't go home, or you can't leave your home if power goes out. So I appreciate that point. I guess I didn't give it away, so that's good. So I'm going back to the chat here. There's actually some questions about kind of expanding beyond mainland Alaska. And then Richard, I think you a little bit alluded to some of these, maybe an answer to this in part. But looking at areas in Aleutians, ADAC always comes up. The commenter made the point that there's abundant water and hydroelectric in Southeast Alaska, as well as something like tidal, and then potentially geothermal on Alaska, for example. Any thoughts on moving into that geographic region or efforts in the works? I'll just leave that out there.
Yeah, our focus would be, on the existing military installations that we have, and then identifying, and we still do, the Army does the same thing, as we go through and we prioritize for each installation. And in some cases, I think I sort of mentioned to you, is that installation doesn't necessarily fulfill the entire mission ecosystem. So I think I sort of alluded that to early. You might use Clear, they see something, and then that goes down to, let's say, down to Elmendorf or maybe Fairbanks or Eielson to put some F-35s up, but they're 2 different bases. Fairbanks is north of Clear and, south. So they interact with one another. And I think it's probably the same thing for the Army. But regarding different technologies, what I want to do and what I'm trying, and like I said, the Army's crushing it, and we're way behind, is to work with OLDCC. And you guys have a very good relationship, I think, with there's she may be on here right now, University of Fairbanks. There's Brittany, yes, Brittany.
She's on vacation.
Okay. But she's been a strong proponent and very helpful. And I know she's been working with the Department of Army as well. over there, but we're trying to break that code, and it could be tidal, it could be geothermal, it could be, for example, we've been talking with Golden Valley about maybe using just a different kind of supercapacitor to meet some of our needs for the new radar system that's going to be up there at Clear, that gives us enough opportunity to ramp up when it needs to ramp up and without pulling, a constant load on the community and having that energy available for the community. And so we've got a really good relationship with the folks at Golden. And yeah, so we're open to those types of things, but it does take time. Unfortunately, things do run a little bit slow in how we like to move. I would say this, is that I do think that there's probably going to be an open door for maybe 2 years where things might move quicker because of what the administration is trying to do with their executive orders. Unfortunately, for those online that maybe didn't watch, whatever the rock show, the ABC, whatever, cartoons, executive orders are not law. So I think the administration might run into some hurdles there, but they are really trying to open up things. What we're hearing on both sides of the House, regardless of a Democrat, Republican, is how can we, work with permitting a little bit better. And we do know in Alaska, there's some, there are some opportunities to move quicker if it's on tribal lands, for example. So we're open to all new technologies and areas that affect our mission, and we believe that anything that helps the mission will help the community. That would be the short answer.
Jeremy, before we disconnect, can I offer something about tribal nations?
Absolutely.
I violated your executive order to us, and I was reviewing the comments, and so there was 2 comments about tribal nations. 2679 recognizes local governments. I started out with that, and they also specifically call out tribal nations. If you're a federally recognized tribal nation, then under 2679, you qualify for an IGSA. Now, I will tell you, I am quite shocked. At Fort Sill in Oklahoma, we actually have 2 tribal nations that looks like we're probably going to break the seal on tribal nations down there. I actually thought that Alaska might break the seal. And then there's a follow-up question that talks about working with the tribal nations for various incredible technology, island remote microgrids with renewable, so on and so forth. I would love to be able to work with some of the Alaskan tribal nations and tap into them as an IGSA resource. Thank you for letting me throw that pitch in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna get, you beat me to it. So that's a great thought there. I will point out, we've got back to the microgrid question. And I think some of the reflecting off some of the earlier comments, in Alaska, we're pretty familiar with the when you've seen one microgrid, you've seen one microgrid. They're all different, and there's truly a lot of experience in Alaska with all of these different systems. Typically, they're the backbone of any of these systems is a diesel. But Tom, who asked the question about microgrids, actually runs a system in Kotzebue where it has wind, solar, battery, and diesel. So yeah, definitely a lot of experience. So that might be an opportunity. There's some, and I'm looping this back around to tribal. We've got the native corporations here in Alaska. They've got preferred contracting mechanisms. Number of them, TDX in particular, and Doyon Utilities, who runs Fort Wainwright, Greeley, and JBear Power Systems. So, that's some probably unique opportunities to partner directly with DoD on these types of things and bring to the table a lot of that microgrid experience. And I'll circle back to the chat here. So I think we're getting close to the end of time, but we've got a question here about actually quantifying energy security or the resiliency. And it's related to, I think the question is trying to get at natural gas is not a, you've got basically the 2 weeks of reserve supply that has to be on hand at any one point. And how does natural gas meet that? I think that's what the question is trying to get at.
So go ahead, Dave.
I wasn't gonna say anything.
Oh,
That's your lead. I'm the partnership guy. I'm standing back amazed with everything you're saying, and I want to write Senator Kane and the other guy we have. I'm
Warner.
all fired up to support you.
Kane and Warner.
Kane and Warner. That's it.
You must be in Virginia with me.
And I could read the question back if you want.
I think there's. Let me unpack it. I think there was a couple questions there. How do we measure resilience? And that's been a big question. And it's been mandated for us to determine how to do that in the last NDAA. Our organization, and this goes to David if he's not aware of this, is that we have this program called the Measuring Resilience process. And we worked really closely with the Department of Army, with Dave Irwin on that side, and then Devin on your group there, and the Department of Navy. That was done through ESTCP, which is a funding program through OSD, RDT&E project, and that just finalized. And what that does, it looks at every little aspect on the base from within the fence line, from switches to, the building, not everything inside the building. So what we do is we identify, the buildings that require through law, which would be the 6 nines, which would be super critical. And then there's 3 nines, which would probably be like the Child Development Center, for example. And then what that measurement program does, it could say, if I put a microgrid and I put backup battery, how do I go from 3 nines to like 6 nines? So there's any kind of permutations that are there to get there. So if there's a deficiency, I can't say that it would be natural gas or whatever it would be. It's that up to the engineers to determine that, but they can take this process and they can put different things into it to say, okay, I'm at 4 nines, but I've got to get to 5 nines. I'm going to add a new switch here. Okay, that didn't quite get me there. Let me add, solar to it. Oh, then that got me there. Or take the solar out because I don't need the switch, whatever it is. Because I did mention that while we focus on resilience, we are responsible stewards of the taxpayers' money too. So we're just not going to try and do things that are expensive. Or if there's areas, maybe we had the 5 nines. And why would we spend money on a microgrid in an area that already meets those criteria? Now, here's what's going to be more interesting. So we also got additional funding working again with Dave Irwin. I have to say this to Dave so he's aware on the Army side of the house, and then Devin's working this with us too in the Navy. It's called the Regional Energy Assessment. Now what we've done, we have all the FERC 715 data, and then we're going to start working the utilities to get real data from utilities and create a real enriching relationship. The Army's actually done this at one of the bases, the MRP. I can't remember which one it was. It's one that's local here. I can't remember which one it was. But they had a UP, and the utility didn't even talk to them until they started using this process. So I think what we're going to see here, getting back to that question, is we have a process to measure resilience. That process allows us to look at different engineering solutions to get to whatever that need is. And then that could be anything. I don't want to focus on, and it goes back to really what David said very early in the conversation, is there is no one solution set here for these, for anything that we do. If it's any infrastructure, it could be a road. Do you use this type of pavement or this one? Well, it depends. If I'm in Alaska, I have to have a different grade, it has to be different than if I use it here, probably in Florida. So, but I don't want to give a direct answer. I'm sorry to be broad about it, but it's more of a technical response that we do have a process, and that process allows us to look at different solution sets and make an informed decision. So hopefully that helps whomever had that in their web chat.
Yep, I think so. So I think we're a little bit past time, but I want to give you an opportunity for closing comments, Dave, and then Richard.
My only closing comments within DoD, it's sort of like, you've heard things like the Bro Code, where we all agree to try to use as many acronyms as possible to confuse the public. I feel we may have failed in this area. I didn't hear a lot of acronyms used, but if we did, and you have a question what something means, I saw that IGSA was answered. Feel free to reach out. I think our contact information is available. We are always open to answer honestly and with transparency. I will tell you, if you ask me a question, just be prepared for the honest truth. If you don't like honesty, don't ask me. Otherwise, you and I won't get along. Richard?
That was really refreshing. And Dave, hey, you guys broke the code with, the IRPs and the DSIPs. So maybe reach out if you get a chance, and maybe you can tell us how you did that so we can join the club there with OLDCC. We're working really closely with them, and they have an Air Force liaison. But for the group that's here, Alaska, as a frontier, community, really leads on many efforts in there. We do recognize that there is a real energy problem that you're running into with peak natural gas that's there. And I think what we want to do, not just for the military perspective, to ensure that we have continuity of our mission and ensuring that we can meet our mission capabilities, but also to work with the community. As been said, we live in the community. We're part of the community. We contribute to the community. And so I think there's going to be great opportunities. I'm looking forward, if you guys want to reach out in some capacity, reach out to your senators to let them know about the new opportunities that are underneath their feet. Feel free to do it, and we'd be happy to walk in a meeting with you.
Okay, well, great. Thank you very much, both. And I will either see you at the Sustainable Energy Conference or the Defense Forum, or possibly in DC next time I'm there. Thanks for taking the time.
Be safe, be well. Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye. Okay, so that concludes our meeting for the day. I'm going to leave it there and then hand it off to Vanessa for kind of wrap-up remarks, but I do want to say thank you to everyone who joined us. The recording is available, will be available after the fact, and I believe we'll be able to distribute some of the presentations as well. Those have been cleared. And Eddie, I see your question there in the chat. Just shoot me an email and I can put you in touch with some of the exec folks. Okay, with that, I'll hand it off to Vanessa to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy and Dave and Richard. That was a fascinating conversation on the future possibilities and the federal perspective for Alaska. And we've went through everything from base microgrids to new opportunities for the state, such as geologic hydrogen, to new processes for measuring resilience. I saw a question in the chat about that. I also would love to see that process. We hope that you learned something over the last 2 days, and we hope that you have a better understanding of how dual use infrastructure plays a role in Alaska's past, present, and future. The recording of this workshop will be available on the Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference website at www.alaskasustainableenergy.com very soon, so you can check back for that link. We would love your feedback to know what you liked about the workshop and how we can improve. I see some people are dropping in comments and feedback in the chat, but we have a survey for you. You can access the survey by scanning the QR code on the screen now with your smartphone, or you can click the link that goes in the chat right now. And as a reminder, everyone who completes the survey will be entered to win one 3-day conference ticket to the Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference in June. You will meet people who have been presenting today and throughout this workshop series at the conference. And then we do know that there will be many representatives from the current administration, as well as from Korean and Japanese nations who want to talk about Alaskan LNG. So it should be a really dynamic audience and participation at the conference in June. Coming up next, be sure to check out our last and final virtual workshop, which is the IEEE 1547 Interconnection Standard, Enabler of Technical Innovation and End User Benefit. That will be happening on Tuesday and Wednesday, the 13th and 14th of May. You can register for the workshop via the ASEC website, and we will put the link in the chat. And then, of course, we do hope to see you all at the Alaska Sustainable Energy Conference at the Dena'ina Center in Anchorage. And again, that's from June 3rd to June 5th. Jeremy will be there, I'll be there, and we would love to meet you in person. Tickets are available for the conference at alaskasustainableenergy.com. So last but certainly not least, thank you to all the wonderful presenters today and yesterday, and special thank you to Aaron, Katie, Jeremy, and Brittany, who really convened this workshop and were able to understand how to share the multiple perspectives and the multiple benefits and challenges related to this complex topic of dual use infrastructure. I think they did an incredible job of helping us kind of go along on that journey with them in the last 2 days. I'd also like to thank Government Event Services for the wonderful logistical support they have provided. They make us look good and we really appreciate it. And then thank you to you. So thank you for joining us for Dueling over Dual Use Infrastructure, which is hosted by Alaska Center for Energy and Power. Have a wonderful day.